The morning rush at Patsy's Diner ended the way it always did, with a clatter of plates being stacked, a few stragglers nursing their second coffees, and Rachel Morgan standing at the service counter writing down what they'd run out of before noon. Buttermilk pancake batter, sausage links. The good orange juice, not the kind from concentrate. She wrote it all down in the small spiral notebook she kept in her apron pocket. The same notebook she'd been using for 11 years, replacing it every few months when the pages ran out. Always the same brand from the office supply store in Harwick, always college ruled, always blue. It was a Tuesday in late September, and the light coming through Patsy's front windows had that particular slant of early autumn golden and slightly regretful, the kind of light that made everything look more beautiful than it actually was. The diner sat on the corner of Main and Caldwell, in Morrow Falls, Tennessee, population 4,000, and dropping, according to the sign, on Route 12. The sign had said 4,000 for as long as Rachel could remember, but she suspected the actual number was closer to 3,800, now given the number of storefronts that had gone dark in the past 3 years. She capped her pen and looked out at the dining room. Patsy Guthrie, who had owned the place for 30 years and whose name was on the sign, was wiping down the far end of the counter with the efficiency of a woman who had been wiping down counters for so long that the motion lived in her hands independently of her attention. Patsy was 71 and had no intention of stopping. Her late husband had built the booths himself, solid maple sanded, and refinished twice in the last 3 decades. The floors were black and white tile that had gone gray with age in the high traffic areas. The menu was laminated. The coffee was strong. "You're doing that thing," Patsy said without looking up. "What thing?" "That thing where you stand still, but you look like you're running somewhere in your head." Rachel set her notebook on the counter. "Noah's teacher called this morning, before my shift." Patsy stopped wiping. She turned. "What happened?" "He didn't turn in the history paper." Again, Rachel pressed her palms flat against the counter. "That's the 3rd assignment this semester. It's October, Patsy. It's been 6 weeks. Did you talk to him?" "I talked. He listened with that face he does." "What face?" "The polite one. The one that means he's waiting for me to finish." Patsy considered this. She had a way of considering things that felt genuinely useful, not the empty nodding that most people substituted for thinking. "He's 14, she finally said. "I know he's 14. His mother is in a halfway house in Memphis. His father hasn't been in the picture since he was 3. His grandmother works double shifts and worries herself half to death." "I know all of that." "I'm just saying," Patsy said carefully, "the boy carries a lot. Sometimes carrying a lot looks like not turning in homework." Rachel picked up her notebook again. She knew Patsy was right. She also knew that knowing something and being able to do something about it were 2 entirely different problems, and she'd been living in the gap between them for going on 3 years now, ever since her daughter Shelley had gone from functioning to not functioning in what felt like the span of a single summer, and Rachel had taken Noah in because there was no one else. She loved Noah completely. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that loving someone completely didn't mean you knew how to reach them. Chet. The first Friday of October arrived with a cold front that came down from the north and stripped the remaining leaves off the dogwoods along Main Street overnight. Rachel opened the diner at 6:15, which was standard, started 2 pots of coffee, and was cutting lemons when the bell above the door sounded at 7:45. She didn't look up immediately. She heard the door, heard the particular pause of someone deciding where to sit, and then heard the familiar sound of the corner booth, Booth 7, all the way at the back, left by the window that looked out onto the parking lot, receiving a new occupant. The booth made a specific sound when someone slid into it because one of the bench seats had developed a slight creak 3 years ago, and Patsy had been meaning to fix it ever since without getting around to it. Rachel dried her hands and picked up a menu out of habit, though she already knew she'd forget to bring it. The man in booth 7 was somewhere in his mid to late 50s, with the kind of posture that spoke not of arrogance, but of long habit. The posture of someone who had been expected to command rooms for decades, and whose spine had simply made peace with the arrangement. He had gray at his temples, and more throughout his dark hair cut with the precision of a good barber, and not a great one. She noticed things like that after years of reading people across a diner counter. His jacket was expensive. Not flashy expensive, not watch and cufflinks expensive, just the kind of understated expensive that announced itself through quality of fabric and the way it sat on his shoulders. His hands were resting on the table. He was looking out the window at the parking lot. "Morning," Rachel said, setting a menu in front of him. Coffee. He looked up. He had gray eyes. She noticed the kind that were genuinely gray rather than blue, passing for gray, and there was something in them that was hard to name. Not unfriendly, not cold, more like the eyes of a man who had developed the habit of looking at things carefully before he committed to reacting to them. Please, he said, and then after a pause, black. She poured the coffee and left him with the menu. He didn't need more than a minute. When she came back, he ordered without looking at it 2 eggs over medium wheat toast, dry hash browns, orange juice. He folded the menu and set it at the edge of the table with the particular tidiness of someone who understood that other people had work to do and that leaving menus organized was a small courtesy. Rachel wrote the order down and was halfway to the kitchen when something made her glance back. He was looking out the window again. His hands were around the coffee cup. He hadn't drunk from it yet. She put the order in and didn't think much more about it. He came back the first Friday of November. She recognized him immediately. Not because he was remarkable, though he was, but because she had a good memory for regulars and the particulars of their habits. He sat in booth 7 again. He ordered the same thing. He ate methodically and without apparent pleasure, which Rachel had come to understand over the years, didn't mean the food was bad. Some people ate for fuel. Some people ate to fill time. Some people ate to stay in a place a little longer because the place had something they needed, though they might not have been able to tell you what. This man felt like the third kind. He left a $20 on a $14 ticket, which was generous but not conspicuous. He thanked her when she refilled his coffee. He did not make small talk. He was not unfriendly. There was a warmth somewhere behind those gray eyes that she could sense without being able to point to it. But he did not invite conversation, and Rachel respected that. She had customers who came in every week for years and never told her anything beyond their order, and she'd learned that there was nothing unkind in that. Privacy was a form of dignity. She found herself walking back to the counter, thinking that she'd like to know his name. She told herself that was nothing. She thought that about a lot of customers. By December, he had become part of the rhythm of the place. First Friday of every month, not every week, she'd checked her memory against the calendar and confirmed it first Friday, booth 7, same order. The other waitresses had noticed him too. Donna, who was 26 and had been working at Patsy's for 2 years while she figured out what came next, called him the mystery man, with a kind of cheerful romanticism that Rachel found both slightly irritating and entirely accurate. Carla, who was 53 and had been working at Patsy's almost as long as Rachel, and who regarded new customers with the measured skepticism of someone who had been burned by excitement before, simply noted that he tipped well and didn't make a mess. "You ever actually talk to him?" Donna asked one December morning, nodding toward booth 7. "I take his order," Rachel said. "I mean, talk. He doesn't seem to want to talk." Donna considered this with the expression of someone trying to decide whether this was interesting or disappointing. "He looks sad," she finally said. Rachel glanced back at booth 7. The man was reading something on his phone or appearing to. His coffee was half finished. He had a way of sitting very still that made the surrounding space feel quieter. "A lot of people look sad," Rachel said. "Not like that, though." Rachel didn't answer because she knew what Donna meant, and because knowing what someone meant wasn't the same as knowing what to do with it. The first real conversation happened by accident, the way the first real conversations usually did. It was February, a Friday, and the town had gotten 4 inches of snow overnight, unusual for Morrow Falls, which sat in a valley that tended to catch rain rather than snow, and which consequently treated any snowfall with the disproportionate alarm of people who dealt with it rarely. Half the breakfast crowd hadn't come in. Patsy's was quiet in the particular way of snow days, the few people who were there feeling slightly conspiratorial about it, as if they'd all passed a test that the absent ones had failed. The man in booth 7 had come in regardless. He was already there when Rachel arrived, which meant he'd been there when Carol opened at 6, which meant he'd either been up very early or had driven some distance. She had just refilled his coffee, his second cup, which was unusual. He normally had one when her foot caught the edge of the booth's base, and she stumbled. Not badly. Not a fall. Just a catch and right yourself that was over in a second. But the coffee pot tilted and she instinctively pulled it back, and some of the coffee sloshed over her wrist. "I'm fine," she said immediately before anyone could say anything, which was a reflex she'd developed over years of not wanting people to fuss. "You should run cold water on that," the man said. He was already half out of his seat. "It's nothing." She looked at her wrist. It was reddening slightly. "Cold water," he said, again. not commanding, just certain. First 2 minutes matter. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the gray eyes that she'd been cataloging from a careful distance for 4 months. And there was something there that she hadn't seen before, or maybe she'd seen it and not let herself register it, which was a genuine, focused concern that had nothing performative about it. Okay, she said. She went to the kitchen and ran cold water over her wrist for 2 minutes, which she actually timed. And when she came back out, he had settled back into his seat and was looking at his coffee. Better, he asked. Yes, thank you. She paused. Most people would have just said, oh no, and left me to figure it out myself. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. It was subtler than that, more like the face a person makes when something lands closer to home than they expected. Most people find it easier to react than to actually help, he said. That's cynical. Is it wrong? She thought about it. She thought about the number of people who had told her over the past 3 years that they were sorry about Shelley, sorry about Noah's situation, sorry about everything, and the much smaller number who had actually done anything useful. No, she said. It's not wrong. He nodded as if they'd settled something. She picked up her coffee pot and her notepad and went back to work. And she was aware in a way she hadn't been before that something small had shifted between them. She still didn't know his name. Teta. She learned it in March, not from him but from Patsy, who had done some quiet investigating of her own after noticing how often Rachel came back from booth 7 with a slightly altered expression. His name is Michael Harrington, Patsy said one evening after close while they were rolling silverware. He runs some kind of logistics company, one of the big ones. Rachel set down the fork she was holding. How big? The internet says very. How very? Patsy gave her a look. The kind of very where you'd say, oh, and then not quite know what to do with your face. Rachel thought about the plain jacket, the single cup of coffee, the 20 on a $14 ticket, generous but not showy. He doesn't act like it. No. Patsy agreed. He doesn't. Did you find out why he comes here? I did not. Did you try? Patsy smiled at the silverware. I figured that was more in your line than mine. Rachel rolled 3 more sets of silverware before she said anything else. It's not in my line, Patsy. It could be. I'm his waitress. You're his favorite waitress, which is different. Patsy set down a completed roll of silverware with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had made her point and didn't need to underline it. Rachel drove home in the cold March dark, thinking about gray eyes and the way a man could sit alone in a booth for months and still somehow not seem lonely. She thought about the distinction between solitude and loneliness, which was something she'd learned about herself in the years since her divorce, that you could want company and also be glad of its absence, that both feelings could be present at once, and that the fact of their coexistence didn't mean either one was a lie. She pulled into the driveway of the small house on Whitfield Street that she'd rented for 9 years, saw the light on in Noah's room, and felt the familiar mixture of relief and vigilance that had become her default emotional state regarding her grandson. Relief that he was home. Vigilance about everything else. She sat in the car for 2 minutes before going inside. Spring came. The conversations in booth 7 lengthened. Not dramatically, she was still his waitress, and he was still a man who didn't offer information readily. But the silences between exchanges had begun to contain less distance. He asked her once in April whether the diner had always been there, or whether it had been renovated, and she'd told him the history of the place, Patsy's late husband Frank building the booths in 1989, the original counter the way the floor had buckled in the flood of 2003, and been relaid one tile at a time. He listened the way he did everything carefully without interrupting, with the kind of attention that made you feel your words were landing somewhere real rather than bouncing off polite inattention. She asked him once, it felt natural in a lull between the breakfast crowd and the lunch prep, whether he was from Tennessee. No, he said. She waited. Kentucky, he added. Originally. Originally, she repeated. That word does a lot of work. He looked at her. The almost smile. It does, he agreed. She didn't push. She never pushed, but the word stuck with her originally because it implied a distance traveled that wasn't only geographic. In May, Noah was suspended for 2 days for fighting in the hallway. He'd thrown the first punch, which was unlike him, or unlike the Noah she thought she knew, which she was beginning to suspect was not exactly the same thing. She told him when she picked him up from school that they would talk about it that evening, and he said okay with the polite waiting face, and by the time evening came, she had rehearsed the conversation 4 times in her head and none of the rehearsals had gone particularly well. "Tell me what happened," she said. "Marcus said something about my mom," Noah said. He was sitting across from her at the kitchen table, arms crossed, looking at a spot somewhere over her left shoulder. "I told him to stop. He didn't." Rachel studied her grandson. He had Shelley's coloring, the dark hair, the brown eyes, but his expressions were more careful than Shelley's had ever been more closed. He'd been learning for most of his 14 years how to take up less space. "I understand why you hit him," she said. He looked at her surprised. "That doesn't mean it was the right choice," she added, "but I understand why." The silence that followed was different from his usual silences. It had something in it that she thought might be relief. "She called," he said after a moment, "your mom Sunday night while you were at Donna's." Rachel kept her face neutral. "What did she say?" "That she was doing better. That she wanted to see me over the summer." He picked at the edge of his sleeve. "She says that." "I know she does. Do you think she means it this time?" Rachel looked at her grandson, 14 years old, carrying the weight of a mother who loved him completely and couldn't stay sober long enough to show it consistently. And she thought about what honesty required in moments like this, and how honesty sometimes meant saying you didn't know when you genuinely didn't know, rather than offering comfort that turned out to be false. "I don't know," she said, "but I know she loves you. That part has never not been true." He nodded slowly. It wasn't enough, but it was something, and sometimes something was what you had. "What?" The month Patsy told her the diner's revenue was down, 18% from the previous year, was the same month that the new highway bypass opened 14 miles to the east, rerouting the truck traffic that had kept the morning rush consistent for 3 decades. It was June, a heavy Tennessee summer, and the air inside Patsy's had the particular close warmth of a place that had never had great air conditioning and was now relying entirely on 2 oscillating fans and the determination of its occupants. Rachel stood in Patsy's small office. More of a closet, really, with a desk wedged in and a window that looked onto the alley and looked at the spreadsheet that Patsy had printed out and placed on the desk between them without comment. "How long?" Rachel asked. 6 months, maybe 8. If things turn around." Patsy's voice was even. She was not Rachel had always thought a woman who wasted energy on fear ahead of necessity. "Or if I can pull something together." "What kind of something?" "I have a few ideas. None of them are good enough yet." Patsy folded her hands on the desk. "I want you to know, Rachel, I'm not going to leave people hanging. Whatever happens, I'm going to give everyone as much notice as I can." "I'm not worried about that," Rachel said, though her chest had tightened in a way that suggested her body disagreed. "You should probably be a little worried about it," Patsy said, not unkindly. Rachel nodded. She thought about the rent on Whitfield Street. She thought about Noah's school supplies, the orthodontist appointment she'd been putting off, the fact that Shelley's halfway house cost money that had to come from somewhere, and part of it came from Rachel, even though Shelley didn't always know that. She thought about a spreadsheet of her own, the one she kept in her head, the one that never quite balanced. She thanked Patsy and went back out to the dining room. The July visit was a Friday the 13th, which Rachel noticed only because Donna mentioned it and had opinions about it. The morning had been slow. The bypass was already having its effect. The trucker regulars gone, the booth traffic down to a handful of locals and a few travelers who hadn't yet updated their route maps. Booth 7 was occupied at 7:53. Michael Harrington ordered his usual, drank his coffee, and was on his second cup when Rachel stopped at the booth to refill it and found herself for the first time in the 8 months of his patronage genuinely uncertain what to say. She said nothing. She poured the coffee. She started to turn away. "Is everything all right?" She stopped. She hadn't said anything, hadn't signaled anything, or she hadn't meant to. She turned back. He was looking at her with the gray eyes, and there was something in them that she recognized as actual attention, the real kind, the kind that noticed things. "Just a rough morning," she said. He nodded. He didn't ask more, which she appreciated. She was at the counter before she thought he noticed. Out of a half-empty diner, an hour into a shift in which she'd spoken maybe 20 words, he noticed. She carried that thought around for the rest of the morning and didn't know quite what to do with it.
What?
It was August, the last Friday of the month, 4 days before school started again, when she found the book. She almost missed it. He'd left his usual tip, and she was clearing the booth coffee cup orange juice glass. The small plate that had held his dry toast when she noticed the book wedged against the wall side of the bench. It was a paperback worn the kind of wear that came from being carried and read and carried again. not the theatrical wear of something that had been left in a window for appearance. The cover was some kind of literary novel she didn't recognize. She picked it up to set it aside for the lost and found, and as she did, a photograph slipped out from between the pages and fell to the table face down. She almost didn't look at it. Lost items were private, and she had a general policy of not examining what people left behind. But the photograph had fallen face down, and when she picked it up to slip it back between the pages, she turned it over without thinking the way you do. Two men, both dark-haired, standing outdoors somewhere, a parking lot it looked like, or a gas station somewhere unremarkable. The older of the two, she recognized him just barely. He was younger, but unmistakably the same posture, the same quality of stillness, had his arm around the younger man's shoulders. The younger man was grinning in the direct, uncomplicated way of someone who didn't yet know that grins cost something. He looked like Michael Harrington. Not exactly the jaw was different, the eyes lighter, but he looked like him the way relatives look like each other, assembled from the same source material. She turned the photograph over. On the back in handwriting, she didn't recognize the wide, slightly uneven script of someone who'd been taught to write carefully and then had stopped being careful over time, 4 words, a number, and a sentence. Booth 7. Fridays. Don't forget me. Rachel stood very still in the empty diner holding the photograph and felt something turn over in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. She set the photograph back between the pages. She put the book on the lost and found shelf behind the counter. She went back to work. But for the rest of the afternoon, through the quiet lunch service and the even quieter mid-afternoon lull, she kept thinking about the handwriting on the back of that photograph and the easy grin of the young man and the way Michael Harrington sat in booth 7 every month and looked out the window at the parking lot as if he were waiting for something that he already knew was never going to arrive. The school year started. Noah came home on the first day with a backpack full of syllabi and the face of someone who had made a private decision about something and wasn't yet ready to share it. Rachel fed him dinner, chicken and rice, one of the 4 meals she rotated through the weeks when work was long and creativity was low, and asked about his teachers, and he answered in the clipped, factual way that she'd learned to accept as actual communication rather than withholding. "Ms. Reardon for English," he said. "She seems okay. She made us write 1 sentence about what we read over the summer." "What did you write?" He looked at his plate. "That I read a book about a dog." "Did you?" "It was a good book." He looked up. "It was about the dog, but it was really about this family that couldn't talk to each other. The dog was the only one everyone talked to." Rachel considered this. "What happened to the family?" "They kind of figured it out, eventually." He pushed a piece of chicken around. "It was sad, and then it wasn't as sad." "That sounds like a pretty good book," Rachel said. "Yeah." He went back to eating. After a moment, she said the sentence was interesting. "Miss Reardon. She said most people wrote about the book, but I wrote about what the book was really about." Rachel watched her grandson and felt the specific bittersweet tenderness of watching a child be more perceptive than they knew. "She's right," she said. "That's what the best books do." He didn't respond, but something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly, the way posture does when a person files something away. September came, and with it a cool front that felt like relief after the long Tennessee summer. The diner's revenue had not improved. Patsy had not said more about the 6 to 8 month timeline, but she also hadn't rescinded it, which Rachel took to mean it still stood. She had started checking job listings on her phone during the afternoon lull. Not with any urgency, yet just to have a sense of the landscape, what was available in Morrow Falls and the surrounding area for a woman with 11 years of service industry experience, some community college credits from a long time ago, and no illusions about her market value. The listings were not encouraging. She put her phone away and went back to work. The first Friday of September arrived. Rachel had worked the opening shift, and by 7:30 she'd served 9 customers. None of them remarkable, all of them handled in the efficient and warm manner that was her professional baseline. She was refilling the napkin dispensers at the counter when she heard the door and the small creak of booth 7 receiving its occupant. She waited a beat. She picked up the coffee pot. She walked to the back of the diner. He was already looking out the window when she arrived. The parking lot outside was empty except for her car and Carol's truck. The morning was gray, threatening rain. "Morning," she said. "Morning." He looked up. The gray eyes had something different in them today, something that she might have called tiredness, but wasn't quite that it was heavier than tiredness. She poured his coffee. She didn't ask about his order because she knew his order. But she didn't turn away immediately. "I found something of yours last month," she said. He went still the way he did when something mattered. "A book. It was wedged behind the seat cushion. It's on the lost and found shelf." She paused. There was a photograph inside it. Something moved through his expression. She felt it more than saw it, a kind of internal shift, a door closing somewhere behind his eyes. "I'll pick it up," he said. "Of course." She refilled his coffee, which didn't need refilling. "I didn't look at it," she said, which was not exactly a lie and not exactly the truth. "I just saw it was there before I put it away." He looked at her. She had the impression that he was measuring the distance between what she'd said and what she meant, and that he was a man who had spent a long time getting accurate readings on that particular distance. "Thank you," he said. She went back to the counter. When she brought out his order eggs over medium wheat toast dry, hash browns, she set them in front of him and said without planning to, "The photograph was of two men. I didn't know who the other one was." It was a small offering. It was also an invitation she knew, and she felt slightly exposed by the fact of having made it. He looked at his plate for a moment. "My brother," he said. His name was Daniel. Was. She heard the tense. She nodded once as if receiving something carefully and went back to work. He ate his breakfast. He drank his coffee. He left his usual 20. On his way out, he stopped at the counter and picked up the book from the lost and found shelf. He held it for a moment. She was watching from her peripheral vision, not obviously, and then he looked up and found her eyes across the diner. His name was Daniel, he said again, as if he'd decided she deserved the full weight of it. "I know," she said. "You said." He nodded. He left. Rachel stood very still at the counter for a moment, the coffee pot in her hand. Donna was watching her from the kitchen pass-through with undisguised interest, but Rachel didn't acknowledge it. She was thinking about the weight of two words was, and how a man could carry that particular grammar around with him for what must have been years, and how it showed in his posture when he sat alone in a booth that apparently meant something she didn't yet understand. She thought about Noah saying about the book with the dog. It was sad, and then it wasn't as sad. She picked up her order pad. She went back to work. But booth 7, she noticed, didn't feel entirely empty in the time after Michael Harrington left it. October returned, and with it the particular quality of light that had marked the beginning of all this golden and slightly regretful. The same angle it had been a year ago, almost exactly when she'd first noticed the man who sat alone and looked out windows. The leaves on the dogwoods had turned yellow, and two of the storefronts on the north end of Main Street had paper in their windows now. Patsy's was holding on. The regulars held on with it, the retired men who came for the early coffee, the young mothers who arrived at 9 when the school drop-off was done, the handful of travelers who hadn't yet adapted to the bypass. It was enough for now. Now was all any of them could manage. Rachel had given up on the job listings. She'd made a private decision, which was to trust the now and deal with what came later when it actually arrived, because the alternative, carrying the dread of the future while still fully occupying the present, had proven to be too heavy a load. She realized, getting better at putting things down. The first Friday of October was the morning Noah told her before school that he'd run into his mother's situation by looking her up online. He'd found a Facebook page. Shelley's half maintained the last post 3 months old, and he'd seen enough to understand in the specific and unsparing way of 14-year-olds who had grown up faster than they should have that his mother's situation was more complicated than she'd let on in her Sunday phone calls. "She's not in Memphis," he said. He was eating cereal and not looking at Rachel. "She's in Knoxville, at a different place." Rachel set down her coffee cup. "When did this happen?" "I don't know. A while ago, maybe." He finally looked up. His face was very controlled, which was worse somehow than if it hadn't been. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wasn't sure myself," Rachel said. "And because I didn't want to tell you something that wasn't confirmed." "You knew she'd moved." "A beat. Yes." He looked back at his cereal. "Okay. Noah, I'm going to be late," he said. He got up, put his bowl in the sink, got his backpack from the hall. He stopped at the kitchen door. "I'm not mad at you," he said. "I just want to know things, even when they're bad." Rachel nodded. "You're right," she said. "I'm sorry." He left. She sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes after she heard the front door close, and then she gathered herself the way she had been gathering herself for 3 years and drove to the diner. Man. It It was just after 9 when Michael Harrington walked in. He looked, she thought, slightly worse than usual. Not ill. Nothing like that. Just the look of a man who had spent some recent nights in less than adequate company with his own thoughts. She recognized it because she'd been wearing a version of it herself that morning, and she figured she probably still was. She poured his coffee. She brought his order. He was halfway through his eggs when she stopped by to refill his juice. He rarely wanted it, but she always offered, and he looked up and said unexpectedly, "You look like you have something on your mind." "My grandson," she said before she decided to say anything. He waited. "He's 14. He found out something I should have told him myself." He was very reasonable about it, which was somehow worse than if he'd yelled. Michael considered this. "That kind of reasonable," he said, "is what you get when someone has already learned that yelling doesn't work." Something about that landed very precisely, and she felt it land, and she thought he saw that it had. "His mother is my daughter," she said. She's trying. She genuinely is. But trying and succeeding are different things, and he's old enough to know that now." "How long has he been with you?" 3 years. He nodded slowly. His eggs had gone slightly cold. He didn't seem to notice. "He's lucky to have someone constant," he said. "I hope he knows that," Rachel said, and then felt slightly embarrassed by the honesty of it. "He does?" Michael said. "He just can't say it yet." She looked at him. He said it with such quiet certainty, not the certainty of someone offering comfort, but the certainty of someone who actually knew something. "How do you know that?" she asked. He picked up his fork. He looked at his plate. "Because I had someone constant when I was young," he said. "And I couldn't say it either. Not for a long time." She understood then this was a great deal to offer coming from him, and she received it as such. She thanked him and moved away, and she thought a younger brother named Daniel and someone constant from when he was young. It was a very small amount of information. It was also the shape of something much larger. She thought about the photograph. Booth 7. Fridays. Don't forget me. She thought there is a whole story here that I don't know yet. She did not yet know whether she would ever know it. But standing in the October diner with the golden light coming through the front windows and the smell of coffee and toast and the particular permanence of a place that had survived more than it was supposed to, she found that she wanted to. Genuinely wanted to, in a way that had nothing to do with curiosity and everything to do with the feeling that Michael Harrington was a person worth knowing, and that he was in some quiet and undemanding way beginning to feel the same about her. She almost didn't return the photograph. Not because she considered keeping it, that thought never occurred to her, but because returning it meant acknowledging that she'd looked at it. And acknowledging that she'd looked at it meant having a conversation that felt in some way she couldn't entirely name consequential. The photograph lived in the lost and found shelf behind the counter for 3 weeks before Michael came back for the book. And in those 3 weeks, Rachel had looked at the photograph exactly twice more, once by accident, when she was reaching for a pen, and once deliberately late on a Wednesday afternoon when the diner was empty and she was trying to understand what she was actually seeing. 2 brothers. A parking lot. The ease of the younger man's grin. The weight of what the older man was carrying visible even in a photograph that must have been taken long before the wait arrived. Booth 7. Fridays. Don't forget me. She'd wondered in those 3 weeks whether Michael had forgotten that he'd left the book, whether he knew the photograph was in it, whether he would be relieved or distressed to have it back. These questions, she told herself, were none of her business. She filed them under the general category of things she noticed about customers and did not act on. But when he came in on the first Friday of September, and she told him about it, and he said, "My brother, his name was Daniel," with that particular past tense gravity, she understood that she hadn't simply been curious. She'd been trying to locate the shape of his grief the way you might reach out a hand in a dark room, not to take anything, just to understand where the walls were. He came back for the book on a Tuesday, which was not his usual day. Rachel was alone on the floor. Donna had called in sick with what she described as a very credible sore throat, and Carla didn't start until 11 when the bell above the door sounded at 9:15, and Michael Harrington came in wearing a dark overcoat and the expression of a man who had decided to do something and was committed to doing it before he could reconsider. "I was in town," he said, which Rachel doubted given that Morro Falls was not on the way to anywhere relevant. "The book's on the shelf," she said. "I know." He didn't move toward the shelf. He stood at the counter. "Could I—" He stopped. She waited. "Could I sit for a few minutes?" "Of course." She gestured at booth 7 with the coffee pot. Coffee, please. She poured him a cup and brought it to the booth and sat the coffee in front of him and started to turn away. And then she thought he came back on a Tuesday. He said he was in town, which isn't true. He asked if he could sit. None of those things fit his pattern. His pattern was deliberate, controlled, self-contained. Whatever this was, it had cost him something to do. She folded her order pad into her apron pocket. She looked at the empty diner, the quiet tables, the mid-morning hush of a place with nobody in it. And then she looked at Michael Harrington and said, "Is this about the photograph?" "Yes," he said. He looked at his coffee. "I'd like to explain something. If that's—" He paused again, which was unusual for him. He was not a man who usually paused in the middle of sentences. "If you have a few minutes." She had a few minutes. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, which she had never done before in 9 months of serving him, and the act of sitting across from him rather than standing over him changed the register of the entire conversation before a word had been said. "I don't come here for the food," he said. "I know," Rachel said. He looked at her. "You know, I suspected." She kept her voice even. "Nobody drives from wherever you're coming from every month for eggs and hash browns." He almost smiled. It went nowhere. "My brother Daniel," he said, he lived here, in Morrow Falls, for several years." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "I didn't know that when he was alive." Rachel held very still. "We had a falling out. When he was 22, I was 32. I said things." He stopped. He started again. "We said things. He left and I let him leave, and I thought I told myself—" He looked at his coffee. "I told myself that was the right thing. That he needed to work things out on his own. That I was too hard on him. That giving him space was what he needed. But it wasn't," Rachel said. "He died 4 years ago, a car accident outside Knoxville." He said it factually, not flatly. There was a difference, she thought, between flatness and the particular controlled steadiness of someone who had learned to report a fact without collapsing under it. "He had a wallet with his ID, some cash, a photograph of the two of us. When his landlord cleared out his apartment, she found my name in some papers and contacted me." "His landlord here in Morrow Falls?" "Yes." He looked up. "He'd lived in the county for 4 years before he died. I didn't know where he was. I hadn't heard from him, and it had been a long time." Rachel thought about the inscription on the photograph. "Booth 7, Fridays. Don't forget me." She thought about the handwriting, careful and then not careful, and the intimacy of the address, the assumption that the reader would already know who was meant. "He came here," she said, "to the diner. Apparently." Something shifted in his face. "His landlord told me that he used to come here on Fridays, that it was a habit." She remembered because she used to see him walk by her house on Friday mornings. He paused. "So I came. The first time was 4 years ago. I just wanted to—" He looked at the table, the booth, the window that looked out onto the parking lot. "I wanted to see where he'd been, what it felt like. And you kept coming back, every month." He didn't seem embarrassed by this exactly, but he was choosing his words carefully, the way you choose words around something fragile. "It doesn't make a lot of practical sense." "It makes every kind of sense," Rachel said. He looked at her. The gray eyes with something newly open in them, not vulnerable exactly, but less guarded than she'd seen them, like a window that has been opened a crack after being shut for a long time. "He looks like you," she said. "In the photograph, the bone structure. We were 8 years apart. He got more of my father's features." He turned the coffee cup slightly in its saucer. Daniel was the kind of person who walked into a room and things got warmer. I was never that. He had this quality, I don't know how to describe it. He could make anyone feel like they were the only person in the room. Rachel thought, "You're not entirely wrong about yourself, but you're also not entirely right." She didn't say it. "What was the falling out about?" she asked. Then, "You don't have to say." He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that was actually moving towards speech rather than away from it. He wanted to start a business, he said. Something small, a contracting company. He'd been working construction since he was 18. He knew the work. He had a plan. He came to me. I had money by then. The company was doing well. He came to me for a loan. A pause. I told him the plan wasn't good enough, that he wasn't ready. I said I was thorough about it. I laid out every reason it wouldn't work. I think I was right about most of them, actually. But, Rachel said, But he wasn't asking me to audit his business plan. He set the coffee cup down. He was asking his brother to believe in him. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It had the quality of space, the kind you gave someone when they'd just set something heavy down and needed a moment before they could move again. He left that night, Michael said, and he didn't come back. Rachel thought about the 10 years between that night and Daniel's death. She thought about a man, Daniel, arriving in a small town in Tennessee and finding a diner and coming back every Friday, building some kind of life, living it without his brother knowing. She thought about the photograph, "Don't Forget Me," and felt the particular precise sadness of people who love each other and don't know how to cross the distance that their own failures have created. "Did you try to find him?" she asked. "I hired someone," he said. "About 3 years after he left. The trail went cold in Virginia. I stopped." He said it simply without excusing himself, which she thought was its own kind of honesty. "I told myself he'd reach out when he was ready." She let that sit where he'd said it. She didn't offer absolution she wasn't qualified to give. "I'm sorry about your brother," she said. It's a lot to carry." He nodded once, accepting that and nothing more. She stood up. She picked up his coffee cup. "I'll get you a refill," she said, and walked back to the counter and gave him the small privacy of an ordinary gesture while he reassembled himself in booth 7.
But
He came back on the first Friday of October. Their conversations after that were different. Not dramatically. Not transformed, but altered in the way that conversations change after a real thing has been said. Some barrier had been removed, or more precisely, he had moved it, and the absence of it changed the acoustics of everything else. He still didn't volunteer information. He still didn't elaborate without prompting. But he listened differently, with less of the careful measuring she'd first noticed, and more of something that felt like actual interest in what she was saying, not just the polite performance of interest. She told him about Noah in pieces over several visits. The suspension, the homework, the way the boy had of processing things quietly and then surprising her with his actual understanding of the situation. She told him about Shelley in the broad strokes her daughter, the addiction, the half-house, the phone calls that were sometimes genuinely hopeful and sometimes not. Michael listened. He didn't offer solutions, which she appreciated because she had enough people in her life who offered solutions to problems that didn't have solutions. He asked questions occasionally, practical ones. Specific ones, the questions of someone who was thinking, rather than just waiting to respond. "How does he do in school?" he asked once about Noah. "When he's actually engaged?" "Very well," Rachel said. "His English teacher says she used the word perceptive, that he sees past the surface of things." "That's a skill," Michael said. "It can be a burden too. If you see past the surface of things, you can't not see them." He considered this. "That's true," he said. And she had the impression that it was true for him personally, and that he wasn't saying so out of politeness. In November, Noah's English teacher, Ms. Reardon, the one who had called the sentence interesting, sent home a note suggesting that Noah's writing showed real promise and that she'd like to discuss possibilities. Rachel read the note 3 times on her lunch break and felt something loosen slightly in her chest, the particular relief of a parent. She had stopped distinguishing between grandmother and parent. It seemed too fine a line to bother with. Who sees a child find something they're good at? She mentioned it to Michael on the first Friday of November, not because she'd decided to, but because it came out naturally in the flow of conversation, the way things come out when you've gotten comfortable enough with someone that you're no longer editing yourself in real time. "Tell him," Michael said. "I am planning to." Tell him specifically, not just that she said his writing was good. Tell him she singled it out. Tell him she used the word promise. Rachel looked at him. "Why specifically?" "Because he'll hear your writing is good as something you're saying because you're his grandmother. He'll hear your teacher use the exact word promise as something that happened in the world and is therefore true." She thought about this. She thought about a 32-year-old man reviewing his younger brother's business plan and laying out every reason it wouldn't work rather than saying, "I believe in you, and here are the things we need to fix." She thought about how the same analytical mind could produce either of those responses, and about the specific difference between them. "You're right," she said. "I had a similar situation," he said, which was all he said. The person from Booth 7's past appeared in early December on a Thursday afternoon that Rachel was not even scheduled to work, but had come in for because Carla had called out with a bad hip and Donna was in Harwick visiting her parents. The woman was in her 80s, small and deliberate in her movements, with the bright cataloging eyes of someone who had been observant long enough that it had become simply how she saw the world. She sat at the counter and asked for a slice of pie and a decaf, and Rachel poured the coffee and cut the apple pie and set it in front of her. I used to work here, the woman said. Oh, 15 years ago, maybe 12. Gretchen Hadley. Rachel Morgan. They did not shake hands because of the counter between them, but the names had the feel of a handshake. What did you do here? Everything Patsy let me do, Gretchen said with the directness of someone stating facts rather than boasting. Counter floor, some bookkeeping. My eyes gave out, and then I couldn't really do the bookkeeping anymore. She looked around the diner with the comfortable assessment of someone visiting a place they once knew well. Still the same boots, she said. Mr. Grover built them himself, Rachel said. I know. I watched him do it. Gretchen forked a piece of pie. You've been here a while yourself. 11 years. Then, you know the booth in the back? 7. Rachel paused in the motion of wiping down the counter. I know it. There was a young man, this would have been, let me see, 8, 9 years ago, before he died. Gretchen said the last part matter-of-factly. Came in every Friday. Dark hair, dark eyes, smiled at everything. Daniel something. She looked at Rachel. You ever hear of him? No, Rachel said carefully. Before my time with the regulars, maybe. He was a regular for a few years. Lovely boy. He used to leave a $5 tip on a coffee and ask me to make sure the money went to whoever needed it most that week. Gretchen shook her head with the specific fond exasperation of someone remembering genuine goodness. I used to argue with him about it. He'd say, Gretchen, you know better than I do. Who needs it? Just take it. Rachel set down her rag. What happened to him? Accident. I heard about it later through the grapevine. Sad thing. Gretchen ate more pie. The reason I mention it is I was in town seeing my nephew, and I saw a man getting out of a car on Main Street. It took me a minute to place him, but I've been thinking about it, and I'm almost certain I know who he is. Rachel held very still. That young man, Daniel, he talked about his family sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. He had an older brother. Gretchen looked directly at Rachel. He spent a lot of years trying to find his brother again. I know that much. He told me once that he'd written letters. Never sent them, but he'd written them. The apple pie sat untouched between Gretchen's words and Rachel's attention. You said he was trying to find his brother, Rachel said. Did he ever do, if he... I don't think he did, Gretchen said. He stopped talking about it toward the end. Not bitterly, just quietly, like he'd made some kind of peace with it, or was trying to. She finished her coffee. The man I saw on Main Street, he looked enough like Daniel that I thought someone should know. Rachel looked at booth 7 empty in the Thursday afternoon, the window light falling on the maple bench, the particular angle of the seat where a younger man with an easy grin had sat for several years on Friday mornings and left $5 tips and talked to an elderly woman about his family. I'll let him know, Rachel said. That you remember Daniel. Gretchen nodded. She left an exact tip, the precise amount, and gathered her coat and left, and Rachel stood at the counter after the bell above the door sounded and thought about a man who had spent years searching for his brother, and years more trying to make peace with not finding him. He spent years trying to find his brother. She thought about Michael in booth 7 every month, sitting with his back to the wall and his eyes on the parking lot. She thought about a man who had believed for 25 years that his brother had left and never looked back, and about how that belief, that specific wrong belief, had lived at the center of all that guilt, all that grief, all that careful stillness. She thought about the difference between someone who leaves because they hate you and someone who leaves because they don't know how to come back. She thought he doesn't know. She thought he needs to know. She told him in December, not on a first Friday. He came in on the second Friday that month because the first had fallen on a holiday, and he arrived a few minutes before 8, and she was already watching for him, which was new. She poured his coffee and set his order in, and when she came back out with his food, she sat down across from him without asking and said, Someone came in last week who knew your brother. He set down his fork. She told him about Gretchen Hadley. She told him factually in order without editorializing Gretchen's years at the diner, the Friday regulars, the $5 tips, and the argument about who deserved them. She told him what Gretchen had said about Daniel talking about his family, about the letters he'd written. She said, She told me he spent years trying to find you. Michael looked at the table. He did not say anything for a long moment. She watched his jaw and the slight movement there, something being held, something being processed, at a depth that didn't show immediately on the surface. He was trying to find me, he said. It was not a question. It sounded like a man repeating something in order to make it real. According to Gretchen, yes. She said letters. That he'd written but not sent. I don't know anything more than that. She didn't know more than that. He was very still. Outside the December sky was the low pale gray of weather building. The parking lot was empty. Booth 7 held the two of them in its maple-sided quiet, and Rachel thought about the fact that Daniel had sat in this same spot and talked about letters he couldn't send to a brother he couldn't find, and now that brother was sitting here being told about them, and the whole arc of it was so perfectly tragic and so simply human that she felt briefly the desire to cry, which she did not act on. I believed he hated me, Michael said. He said it quietly. For 25 years I thought he'd left and wanted nothing to do with me, and I told myself that was his right, that I'd earned it. He looked up. I was building my case against myself every year, another brick. You're not done with the case, Rachel said. No, but you have new evidence. He looked at her. Something in his expression that she'd never seen before, not an opening exactly, but the recognition that an opening was possible. Letters he didn't send, he said. Gretchen said he stopped talking about it toward the end. She said he seemed to have made peace with something. I think she was careful here. I think that's its own kind of message, that he was trying to, that he didn't die angry. Michael picked up his coffee cup. He held it for a long time without drinking. I need to know if the letters exist, he said. Then we should try to find out, Rachel said. It was the first time she had used the word we in any context that involved Michael Harrington, and she noticed it, and she was fairly certain he noticed it too, and neither of them acknowledged it, which felt like the right choice. Huck. He asked her on the January 1st Friday if she would help him look. She said yes. This also surprised her, which she took as information. They started with his landlord, a woman named Phyllis Oates, who still lived on the same street where Daniel had rented a small house for 4 years. Rachel knew of Phyllis the way she knew of most people in Morro Falls, by sight, and context not well. She called Patsy first to ask if she had Phyllis's number, and Patsy gave it to her and didn't ask why, which was one of many things Rachel appreciated about Patsy. She called Phyllis and explained without going into detail that there was a member of Daniel Harrington's family who was trying to understand more about his time in Morro Falls, and whether anything had been left behind when the apartment was cleared. Phyllis was quiet for a moment. There were some boxes, Phyllis said. I kept them for about a year after I thought family might come. Then I donated most of it to the church thrift store. A pause. There was one box I kept. I'm not sure why exactly. Just a feeling. Rachel said, Would you mind if we came to see it? Not at all, Phyllis said. I've been wondering for 3 years if someone was going to ask. They went on a Saturday in late January. Rachel's day off, a cold, clear morning. The kind of Tennessee winter day that was brisk without being brutal. Michael drove. He'd appeared at the diner at 9, which was an hour and a half before they'd arranged to meet, and he was sitting in the parking lot when she arrived. She did not mention that he was early. She got in the car and gave him the address, and they drove the 6 blocks without much conversation, which was fine with both of them. Phyllis Oates was a practical woman in her early 70s with gray hair and a no-nonsense braid, in the manner of someone who had organized and stored information about the world for several decades and could retrieve any of it efficiently. She made them tea and brought out the box without ceremony. It was a medium-sized cardboard box, the kind that reams of printer paper came in, and it held a moderate collection of Daniel Harrington's remaining possessions, a few paperback books, a handmade clay bowl that looked like it might have been made in a class somewhere, a spiral notebook, and a bundle of envelopes held together with a rubber band. Michael saw the envelopes and his hands went still on the box's edge. Rachel looked at the bundle. The envelopes were not sealed. They were addressed to no one, or rather each of them had only a name on the front written in the same wide, slightly uneven script she'd seen on the back of the photograph. Michael, not his last name, just his first name. May I? Michael said to Phyllis. That's why I kept them, Phyllis said simply. He took the bundle. He held it. He looked at Rachel across the box, and she saw in his face something she hadn't seen there before. Not relief, not grief exactly, but the expression of a man standing at a door that has been closed for 25 years and is only now being opened and not knowing yet what he will find on the other side. You don't have to read them now, Rachel said. I know, he said. He looked down at the bundle. I'm going to anyway. She and Phyllis left him in Phyllis's living room. They went to the kitchen and Rachel helped Phyllis wash the teacups, and they talked about inconsequential things. The weather, the diner, the new family that had moved into the old hardware building on Whitfield, and through the kitchen doorway, Rachel could see Michael's profile in the living room bent over a page reading. He read for 40 minutes. When he came to the kitchen doorway, he had the bundle held in both hands, and his face had the particular exhausted quality of someone who has cried in private and is no longer crying but hasn't returned to normal yet. "Thank you," he said to Phyllis. Phyllis nodded once. "He was a good man," she said. "You should know that about him." "I'm starting to," Michael said. They walked back to the car without talking. The January morning was still and cold, the sky the pale blue of winter certainty. Rachel thought about leaving him to his silence, which would have been her usual approach, and then thought that her usual approach wasn't always the right one. "Are you all right?" she asked. "No," he said. "Not entirely." He unlocked the car. They got in. He sat for a moment with the letters in his lap. "He didn't blame me," he said. "That's across all of them. He was angry in some of the earlier ones, but mostly he stopped. He started again. He spent years explaining himself, explaining why he left, why he couldn't come back, why he couldn't call. He was afraid he thought I'd tell him he was right to leave, that I'd confirm his worst fears about himself." He pressed his hand flat over the top envelope. "He didn't hate me. He was afraid of me." Rachel looked at the windshield, the quiet street, the winter bare trees. "He was afraid that if he came back, I'd reject him again," Michael said. "And he couldn't survive another rejection, not from me." His voice was very controlled. "So he stayed away and wrote letters instead. And the last one is from about 6 months before the accident. He says," he stopped for a moment. "He says he's made peace with not seeing me, that he hopes I'm well, that he thinks about me." "Michael," Rachel said. "He says he forgives me." The word landed in the cold car and took up all the space. "He wrote me a forgiveness I didn't know about," Michael said. "For 4 years I've been sitting in that booth building my case against myself, and He stopped. He looked out the passenger window at the bare trees. "He'd already let me off the hook, and I didn't know." Rachel thought about all the things she could say, and the things that wouldn't help, and the things that would, and she said, "You know now." He turned to look at her. "You couldn't know before," she said. "And you know now. That's the whole thing, Michael. That's the only thing that has to be true right now." He was quiet for a long time. The cold sat around them, and the letters sat in his lap, and Rachel sat beside him, and let the silence be what it needed to be, which was large and containing, and not requiring either of them to do anything about it except be present in it. "Thank you," he said finally, "for this, for..." He seemed to run out of specifics, "for knowing it mattered." "Of course it mattered," Rachel said. It came out more simply than she intended, which made it true in the way that simple things are. She thought about Noah, who had said about the book, "It was sad, and then it wasn't as sad." She thought about that being the honest shape of most things worth anything. She thought about Michael Harrington, who had been building a case against himself for 25 years, sitting in his car with his brother's letters in his lap, in the cold January light of a small town where that brother had apparently made a life and found some peace, and she thought that the sad part was not over, not even close, but that it had begun maybe to become less sad, and that was its own kind of beginning. She did not think about the fact that she was for the first time since her divorce 8 years ago aware of being close to someone in a way that was not purely practical. She thought about it later. She filed it under things to examine when she had more information. But the day after Phyllis's house, Rachel's daughter called. She called on Rachel's cell phone, which was the number she always called, but she called at 8 in the morning on a Sunday, which was earlier than usual. Rachel saw Shelley's name on the screen and felt the familiar mixture of hope and caution that was her default setting for her daughter's contact, the hope that this time the voice would sound clear. The caution against hope that had been disappointed too many times to stop being cautious. "Mom," Shelley said. Her voice was clear. Not the forced clarity of someone performing clarity, but the natural, slightly tired clarity of someone who had been working hard at something and was calling from a real place. "I wanted to talk to you before I talked to Noah." "Okay," Rachel said. She went to the back porch with her coffee and sat down in the cold. "I'm doing well," Shelley said. I want to say that first because I know how that phrase sounds. I know I've said it before, but I want to say it specifically. I have been clean for 4 months. I have a job here at the treatment center. Actually, I'm doing intake paperwork. I have an apartment. It's small. It's fine. I'm going to meetings 3 times a week. Rachel's chest did something complicated. I know you can't take that on faith, Shelley said. I wouldn't want you to. I want to be honest with you about where I am. I want to rebuild. She stopped. I want Noah to know I'm trying. Actually trying, not phone call trying. Rachel looked at the bare January backyard, the bird feeder she kept meaning to fill, the fence that needed painting in the spring. What are you asking? She said. I'm asking if I can come visit. In the spring, maybe. If Noah wants that. Her voice was careful. Not to take him anywhere. Just to see him. To let him see that I'm still here. Rachel thought about Noah at the kitchen table eating cereal, saying, I just want to know things, even when they're bad. Let me talk to him, Rachel said. I know. A small silence. Mom, I know this has cost you a lot. All of it. I know. Shelley's voice went slightly uneven, controlled back. I know you've been holding everything together. I just want you to know I see that. Rachel held the phone. She thought about the spreadsheet that never balanced and the job listings she'd checked on her phone and the nights she'd lain awake calculating the gap between what she had and what Noah needed and the arithmetic that never quite worked out. I love you, Shelley, she said. That's not the complicated part. I know, Shelley said. I love you too. After she hung up, Rachel sat on the back porch for a long time with her cold coffee and watched a cardinal land on the unfilled feeder look around with the particular bright-eyed assessment of a creature surveying its options and fly away. She thought there are so many people trying to find their way back to each other. We are all more or less in the same situation. She thought about Michael. She thought about Daniel's letters and the word forgiveness in January sunlight. She thought something is changing. I don't know what to do with that. I am going to have to figure it out. The cardinal came back. This time it stayed on the feeder whether or not there was anything in it, and Rachel watched it for a while and felt something she couldn't entirely name, which was somewhere in the neighborhood of hopefulness, which was somewhere in the neighborhood of terrifying. February arrived with the cold and the particular restlessness of a season that had gone on too long without deciding what it was. Rachel worked her shifts and thought about what Shelley had said and turned it over in her mind the way you turn a stone over to see what's underneath, not sure whether you want what you find or not. She told Noah about the phone call on a Sunday evening, carefully the way she'd learned to deliver information to him factually and completely, without softening it in ways that would feel dishonest or sharpening it in ways that would feel like editorial. Noah ate his dinner while she talked. He was quiet for a long time after she stopped. 4 months, he said. That's what she said. She's had 4 months before. I know. But this sounds different. He said it analytically, not hopefully, which Rachel thought was both more sophisticated and more heartbreaking than hope. She got a job. She got an apartment. Yes. He looked at his plate. He pushed a piece of chicken. Do you believe her? Rachel thought about Shelley's voice on the phone, the specific quality of it. The tiredness that was the tiredness of genuine work, rather than the tiredness of crisis. She thought about all the times she'd gotten it wrong, all the times she'd believed and shouldn't have, all the careful calibration she'd developed to protect herself from exactly this question. I think she's trying, she said. I don't know yet whether it's going to hold. But you think it might? I think it might. Noah looked at her. Do you want me to see her? I want you to do what you want, Rachel said. This is about you. But you have an opinion. She did. She had several. She sorted through them for the ones that were actually useful. I think, she set down her fork, I think it might be good to see her in a context where she's actually doing well, to have that memory of her whatever happens later. She paused. I also think it's okay if you're not ready. Both things are true. He considered this for what felt like a long time. In the spring, he said, like she said, I'll tell her. He picked up his fork. He ate. After a moment, did you tell the man from the diner? Rachel looked at him. Tell him what? About her calling. He didn't look up. You talk about him sometimes. Not a lot. Just you mention things. He helped you figure out how to tell me about my writing teacher. A pause. He must be interesting. Rachel thought about all the ways a 14-year-old boy could observe the world while appearing not to. Yes, she said. He is. Noah nodded as if this confirmed something. He didn't say anything more about it, and Rachel didn't either, but the conversation sat in her chest for the rest of the evening with a weight she couldn't quite characterize. March came, and with it the first real warmth of the approaching year. The dogwoods on Main Street were thinking about blooming. Patsy's was slightly less quiet than the winter months had made it. The cold had kept people in, and the warmth was letting them out again. And a few new faces had appeared over the past weeks. People who'd moved to Morrow Falls from somewhere else, or who'd discovered the diner through the small tourism the town got in the spring and fall. It was not a recovery, but it was a reprieve. Rachel was coming back from the kitchen with 2 plates for the far table when she saw Michael Harrington come through the door. It was a Thursday, not his usual day. He had the same look he'd had that first Tuesday, the look of a man committed to a decision before he could reconsider it, but there was something different about it today. He was carrying something, a folder. "Do you have a few minutes?" he asked at the counter. "Table or booth?" He looked at booth 7. "Table," he said, "near the front." That was new. She found it interesting that he'd chosen the front. She sat across from him at one of the 4 top tables by the window. Donna was handling the floor. Rachel had asked her silently with a look, and Donna had given her an equally silent thumbs up, which was one of the things Rachel genuinely liked about Donna. "I've been going through the letters," Michael said. He set the folder on the table. "And talking to some people. A woman Daniel worked with here, I tracked her down. She was at the hardware company. She remembered him." He paused. "He had friends here. He had a life here." "That's good," Rachel said. "That's important. He opened the folder. Inside were photocopied pages, some handwritten, some typed. He was saving money from the letters. He'd been saving for 3 years before the accident. He'd written down, he pointed to a page. He was saving to start a business, a small contracting company. Rachel went still. "The same plan?" Michael said. "Essentially the same business plan he'd brought to me at 22. He'd been refining it for years, learning from the ground up what he needed to know to make it work." He looked at the page. "He almost had enough capital." "Michael," she said, "I told him at 22 that he wasn't ready, that he needed more experience, better capital, a stronger network." He looked up. "He spent a decade getting all of those things. He built himself into exactly the person I told him he needed to be." His jaw moved. "And then he died before he could use it." Rachel looked at the photocopied pages, Daniel's careful notes, his slow accumulation of everything his brother had told him he lacked. "He wasn't proving you wrong," she said. "He was proving you right. He took what you said and he used it." Michael looked at her. "That's not the story of someone who hated you," she said. "That's the story of someone who trusted your judgment even when he was furious at you, even when he was gone." He looked at the pages for a long time. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm starting to understand that." He closed the folder. He set his hands flat on top of it. "I'm also starting to understand that the story I've been telling myself, the one where I'm the villain and he's the casualty, is too simple." He looked at her. "He made choices too. He could have called. He could have sent the letters. He chose not to." Yes, Rachel said. "That doesn't mean what I did was okay." "No," she agreed, "but it means it's more complicated than you've been letting it be." He looked at her steadily. "You're surprisingly direct," he said. "I've been practicing," she said. He almost smiled. More than before, it arrived at his mouth and stayed for a moment. "I noticed," he said. They sat across from each other at the front table with the March light coming in through the window and the folder between them, and the particular awareness which Rachel noted clinically. The way she noted things, she wasn't sure what to do with that. The distance between them, whatever it had been at the beginning, had reduced itself over the past several months into something very different. "I want to do something for this place," he said suddenly. She waited. "The diner. I know it's having financial difficulties." "Patsy told you?" "Patsy mentioned it in passing, and He stopped. He looked out the window. "I want to help, but I don't know how to offer it without it feeling like a billionaire buying someone's problem," Rachel said. He looked at her, the not quite smile. "Yes, I'll be honest with you," she said. "Patsy would never accept money from a customer, not as charity." "I know, but there might be ways." She thought about the new foot traffic, the travelers, the community. "There might be ways to help that aren't about writing a check." He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "I have some ideas. I don't want to come in as a rescuer." He paused. "I've been trying to stop doing that." "What do you mean?" "Coming in and solving problems with money. It's the reflex. He looked at the table. It was the reflex with Daniel, too. I offered money. I didn't offer belief. He looked up. I've been trying to learn the difference. Rachel held his gaze across the table, and she thought about all the things that had been said and not said over the past year and a half. All the careful distances and small offerings and incremental closings of gap, and she thought, we have become something. I don't know exactly what yet, but we have, she said, that difference matters. I know, he said. I'm learning. Outside, the March light was doing what light does in that particular season, asserting itself, arriving at new angles, illuminating things that the winter had kept in shadow. The diner was quiet. Donna was refilling coffees at the counter. Booth 7 sat empty at the back of the room, its worn maple bench receiving the light the way it always had. Rachel thought about the photograph. Don't forget me. She thought about Daniel, who had sat in that booth for years and built a life and written letters he never sent. And she thought about Michael, who had spent years in the same booth trying to stay connected to something that grief had taken from him. And she thought that the booth itself, the ordinary, practical, maple-sided fact of Booth 7, had been all along the place where both of those stories were waiting to intersect. She thought she was sitting at the intersection now. She didn't know what came next. She knew she wasn't afraid of finding out which was new. It was a Thursday evening, late March, when Noah came home from school and sat down at the kitchen table while Rachel was making dinner and said without preamble, I want to meet him. Rachel turned from the stove. Michael? Yes. Noah had his backpack on still. He looked like a boy who had been working up to saying something all day and had finally run out of patience with himself. You talk about him like he's important. I want to know why. Rachel turned back to the stove. She adjusted the heat under the soup. She thought about how to answer this in a way that was honest without being more than she knew. She started. He's someone who came to the diner with a lot of grief and slowly over a long time started setting it down. And I watched that happen. And it mattered to me. She turned around. Does that make sense? Noah considered it. He lost someone, he said. His brother. And watching him get better made you feel better. Something like that. She paused. Maybe also he was interesting and kind, and he paid attention in a way that not everyone does. Noah nodded slowly. He wasn't looking at her the way he usually looked at her when she talked about work, which was politely and slightly tangentially. He was looking at her directly. I think you should invite him to dinner, he said. Rachel turned back to the stove. Not soon, Noah added, but eventually. She stirred the soup. She thought about all the things she'd filed away over the past months, under things to examine when I have more information, under things that might mean something if I were certain, under things I am not yet ready to be honest about in the clear light of day. Maybe, she said. That's yes, Noah said. That's maybe, Rachel said. But she was smiling at the stove, which she was fairly certain he could see even from the back, and which she found she was not inclined to hide. April in Morrow Falls arrived that year, the way spring arrivals always did in that part of Tennessee. Not with fanfare, but with a quiet accumulation of evidence. One warm day, then 3 cold days. Then a morning when the dogwoods opened and you understood that the cold days were done. The dogwoods on Main Street went from bare to white in what seemed like a weekend, and for a few days the whole town smelled like rain and pollen and the particular sweet green smell of things deciding to live again. Rachel had lived in Morrow Falls for 22 years. She had watched the dogwoods bloom every spring. This April, she noticed them in a way she hadn't the previous years, which told her something about where she was, if not precisely where she was going. She did not invite Michael Harrington to dinner. She thought about Noah's suggestion that's yes, and turned it over for 3 weeks, and then put it down and let it sit at a distance while she thought about other things. She was good at this. It was not always a useful skill, but she had it. She talked to Shelley twice in April. The calls were different from the previous calls. Her daughter's voice had a quality of groundedness that Rachel recognized as real rather than performed. And they talked about practical things, the tentative plan for Shelley to come to Morrow Falls in June, the specific logistics of what that would look like. They talked about Noah. They talked about the treatment center where Shelley worked, the things she was learning, the ways in which helping other people had started to feel like a form of repair for herself. How do you know? Shelley said once in the middle of a practical conversation about dates, when you've actually changed, like how do you know you're not just having a better period? I don't think you ever know for certain, Rachel said. I think you just keep doing the work and checking the evidence. That's terrifying, Shelley said. Yes, but also kind of freeing. Like you don't have to figure it all out. You just have to do the next thing. Yes, Rachel said again. After they hung up, she sat with her phone and thought that this was the most honest conversation she'd had with her daughter in possibly 10 years, and that the honesty itself felt like a kind of medicine, not the cure, not the resolution, but the right condition for something to begin healing. The first Friday of April, Michael was in booth 7 at his usual time. He had been going through Daniel's letters more systematically. Over the past weeks, he'd told her this in the previous month's visit, in the methodical way he had of reporting his own interior work, as if he were a researcher investigating a phenomenon, and felt obliged to keep her updated on his findings. She appreciated the updates. She had become, she recognized, genuinely invested in his findings. He ordered his usual. He ate more of it than he normally did, which she'd started tracking as a rough indicator. The days he ate well were different from the days he ate mechanically, and she had learned over the months to read the difference. Today he ate well. When she came by to refill his coffee, he said, "I found something in one of the later letters." "Tell me," she said. She sat down across from him without asking. "There's a passage about Daniel talks about going through a period of being very angry. At me, but also at himself. At the whole situation." He looked at his coffee. He says he spent almost a year trying to decide whether to call. He wrote out what he would say. He practiced it. Rachel thought about that, a man in a small house in Morro Falls rehearsing a phone call for a year. What stopped him? He says, Michael looked up. He says he was afraid that if I answered and I was kind, it would hurt more than if I'd rejected him. He'd built the rejection into his understanding of things. He could live with the rejection. He wasn't sure he could live with the kindness. Rachel held that for a moment. She looked for the right word. That's not irrational. No, Michael said. It's not. He turned the coffee cup in the saucer. I've been thinking about what it says about how much fear can look like anger, how a person can convince themselves they're done with something when really they're just terrified of it. You're talking about yourself too. Yes. He said it plainly. I thought I was indifferent. I told myself I'd made peace with his absence, but I wasn't indifferent. I was terrified that if I looked for him and found him, I'd have to actually reckon with what I'd done. As long as he was gone, I could keep the guilt clean and theoretical. Rachel watched him. She thought about all the ways people organized their pain, the neat containers they built for it, the ways they labeled the containers wrong, so they could leave them on the shelf and not have to open them. The letters are making you open the containers, she said. Yes. How is that going? He looked at her, the gray eyes with their particular quality of attention. Badly, he said, and also better than I expected. But she told him about Shelley that day, not all of it. She told him the broad strokes, the 4 months of sobriety, the job at the treatment center, the plan to visit in June. She told him about the conversation about change and evidence. She told him about Noah's measured, analytical approach to hope, which she found both admirable and hard to watch. He doesn't let himself hope all the way, she said, because hoping all the way has cost him. That's not unhealthy, Michael said. That's just accurate accounting. There's a version of accurate accounting that protects you from being hurt and also protects you from being glad, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. I know that version. Rachel looked at booth 7. The window. The parking lot outside where the spring light was doing something to the pavement that made it look almost silver. Noah wants to meet you, she said. She felt Michael go still in the way he went still when something mattered to him. I didn't encourage it, she added. He arrived at it on his own. When did he tell you this? A few weeks ago. She folded her hands on the table. I've been thinking about it since. And she looked at him directly. I think it might be good for him to see that people can come through things, that people can be steady. She paused. He doesn't have a lot of examples of that. Michael looked at his coffee. He looked at the table. He looked at Rachel. I would like that, he said, if it's what he wants. I'll tell him. She stood up. She picked up her order pad. She was halfway back to the counter when he said, Rachel. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't quite seen from him before, open, uncertain and resolved all at once, which was a combination that cost something. Thank you, he said, for all of this, for sitting down, for Phyllis, for Gretchen Hadley. He looked at the table. for knowing to tell me things when I wouldn't have known to ask. She held his gaze across the length of the diner. The morning light was in the windows. Donna was at the counter pretending not to watch. Booth 7 sat between them with all its history and its maple quiet. "You're welcome," Rachel said. She went back to work. But she was aware for the rest of the morning of a warmth that had nothing to do with the Tennessee spring and everything to do with being seen. Michael came for dinner at the house on Whitfield Street on a Saturday in early May, which Rachel had spent 3 days either overthinking or deliberately not thinking about cycling between the two with the efficiency of a woman who had gotten very good at managing her own emotional weather. She cooked the chicken thing, which was the best of the 4 meals, and she set the table properly, rather than in the casual way she usually did, and she told herself twice that this was not a significant event, and then stopped bothering with that particular lie. Noah met Michael at the door. Rachel watched this from the kitchen doorway. Her grandson, the boy who had been raised to be careful, who processed things quietly, who had learned that hope cost money, looked at Michael Harrington with those brown, perceptive eyes and said, "You're from Kentucky originally." Michael blinked. "Yes. My grandmother mentioned it once." Noah held the door wider. "Come in." Rachel thought he filed that away months ago, and he filed it away. They ate dinner. Noah asked questions, not many, not the intensive kind, but specific, and considered the questions of someone who had a sense of what they wanted to know and was going about finding it deliberately. He asked Michael about logistics, which Michael explained in terms that were accurate without being condescending, which Noah appeared to appreciate. He asked about Kentucky, which Michael described briefly, a small town, a hardware store his father had run the particular landscape of the eastern part of the state, with its hills and narrow valleys. "Did you like it there?" Noah asked. Michael considered this seriously. "Yes," he said. "I didn't appreciate it while I was there, but yes." Noah nodded. This seemed to satisfy something. "That happens," he said in the tone of someone speaking from experience, which made Rachel want to both laugh and cry. After dinner, Noah went upstairs to do homework, taking himself out of the room with the deliberate thoughtfulness of someone giving other people space, and Rachel and Michael sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the particular quiet of a house that had gotten slightly fuller than it was used to. "He's remarkable," Michael said. "I know," Rachel said. "I'm not objective about it, but I know. The questions he asks, he wants to understand what things cost. Not financially, the other costs." Rachel held her coffee cup. "That's what happens when you grow up watching people pay prices they didn't budget for. And yet, he's not—" Michael paused. "He's not cold. He's careful, but he's not cold." "No." She thought about the book with the dog about it was sad, and then it wasn't as sad. "He knows the difference between being careful and being closed. He's young to know that." "He learned it from someone," Michael said. She looked at him. "He learned it from watching you," he said, "the way you manage things. You're careful without giving up." He set his coffee cup down. "I've watched you all year, the way you do the work and feel the weight, and don't pretend the weight isn't there. He learned that." Rachel was quiet for a moment. She thought about all the ways she'd gotten things wrong, the things she hadn't known how to say to Noah, the information she'd held back when she should have given it. She thought about being human and fallible and doing it anyway. "I make a lot of mistakes," she said. "So do I," Michael said. "The goal isn't not to make them." "What's the goal?" He looked at his coffee. He looked up. "I think the goal is to make them in the service of something that matters," he said, instead of making them because you're afraid." She thought about that for the rest of the evening after he left. She sat on the back porch. The night was warm, the stars were out. The bird feeder still unfilled because she'd been meaning to get to it, and she thought about fear and its relationship to action, and the difference between choices made from love and choices made from the avoidance of pain. She went inside and got the bird seed from the cabinet where it had been sitting for 2 months and filled the feeder. She went to bed and slept well. Shelley came in June. She drove up from Knoxville on a Thursday and arrived at the house on Whitfield Street at 4 in the afternoon, and Rachel was home from her shift, and Noah was home from school, and they were both in the kitchen when the car pulled up. Rachel had told herself a number of things in the week before Shelley's arrival, most of them cautionary, all of them accurate. She had reviewed the evidence. She had noted that 4 months had become 6 months, that the job and the apartment and the meetings persisted, that the voice on the phone remained clear and tired and real. She had acknowledged all of this and continued to apply the caution anyway, because caution and love were not opposites, and because this was her daughter, and she had been here before. Shelley got out of the car, and Rachel saw immediately that something was different. It was hard to say exactly what her daughter looked the same thin in the way she'd been for years. Dark-haired, with the mobile face she'd had since she was a little girl, and which Rachel had always loved. But there was something about how she carried herself, a groundedness that hadn't been there, a presence. Shelley looked at her mother and said, "Hi, Mom," and Rachel said, "Hi, Shelley." And then they were holding each other in the driveway, and Rachel was thinking carefully that she was glad and she was cautious, and both of those were true, and she was going to let them both be true without making one of them go away. Noah appeared in the doorway. Shelley pulled back from Rachel and looked at her son. He was standing in the doorway with his arms at his sides, not crossed. She noted that and his face doing the controlled, careful thing, but his eyes were doing something else, something younger. "Hey, bud," Shelley said. "Hey," Noah said. A pause. Shelley walked up the porch steps. She stopped one step below him so she wasn't towering over him. She said, "You got taller." "Yeah," he said. "Good taller, like you look good." He looked at her. He said, "You look better than I expected." Shelley blinked. She laughed a real laugh, surprised. "Okay," she said, "I'll take that." He moved aside to let her in. Rachel stood in the driveway for a moment after them. She looked at the dogwoods at the end of the street past their bloom now back to green. She thought about the word reconciliation and how it didn't usually look like what you imagined when you heard it. It usually looked like a boy saying, "You look better than I expected," and a woman laughing because it was true, and those two people going into a house together to eat dinner and figure out what came next. She went inside. Shelley stayed for 2 days. They walked around Morrow Falls. They ate at the diner. Shelley had never eaten there, and she liked it. She said the coffee was good, which was true, and Patsy came out and introduced herself and gave Shelley a slice of pie on the house, which was Patsy's way of saying, "You are welcome here," without making it a speech. On Shelley's second evening after Noah had gone to bed, she and Rachel sat at the kitchen table and talked until midnight. They talked about Shelley's father, who had not been in the picture for Rachel's adult life either, and whose absence had shaped them both in ways they were still mapping. They talked about what it had been like for Shelley to grow up watching Rachel manage things alone, managing the divorce, managing the money, managing the performance of being fine. They talked about the ways those things had looked different from Rachel's perspective and Shelley's perspective, and the gap between those perspectives, and how the gap had its own kind of damage. "I thought you didn't need anyone," Shelley said at one point. "You were so competent. You always figured it out. I thought needing people was a weakness because you never seemed to need anyone." Rachel sat with that for a while. "I needed people," she said. "I was afraid of what needing them would cost." "I know," Shelley said. I think I did the same thing in reverse. I needed everyone so much I couldn't function without it. And when the people didn't work out, She stopped. She looked at her hands. "Substances work the same way. They're the one thing that doesn't leave." Rachel thought about that. "And now," she said, "and now I'm trying to learn to be okay with being alone sometimes, to not need the need filled every minute." She looked up. The therapist calls it tolerance of affect, just tolerating the feeling without immediately doing something about it. "That's a real skill," Rachel said. "It doesn't come naturally." "No." Rachel picked up her coffee. "It really doesn't." They sat with that. The house was quiet. Noah asleep upstairs, the neighborhood quiet around them, the June night warm through the screen door. "The man," Shelley said, "from the diner." Rachel looked at her. "Noah mentioned him," Shelley said. "Not a lot, just that there was someone." She looked at her mother with an expression that had something in it of the Shelley who had been an observant little girl, the one who noticed things before she'd had reason to stop noticing. "You look like a person who's trying to decide something," she said. "You've looked like that since I got here." "It's complicated," Rachel said. "Is it?" "He lost his brother. He's been healing from it for a long time, and I've been watching and sometimes helping, and it's..." She stopped. "I don't know exactly what it is." "Do you like him?" "Yes." "Does he like you?" Rachel thought about all the things she'd noted and not acted on. The warmth at the table in March. The particular quality of his attention. "Thank you for knowing to tell me things when I wouldn't have known to ask." "I think so," she said. Shelley smiled. It was the real smile, the one Rachel had missed. "Mom," she said. Sometimes complicated is just the word we use when we know something and we're not ready to say it out loud. Rachel looked at her daughter. She thought about all the years, all the wait, all the careful management of everything. She thought about filling the bird feeder and sleeping well. I know, she said. I'm working on it. Fetch. The week after Shelley left on a Saturday afternoon, Rachel and Michael went back to Phyllis Oates' house. This time they brought coffee from the diner, which Phyllis accepted with evident pleasure, and they sat in her living room and went through the last of Daniel's papers more carefully. Michael had been methodical about this. He'd made a list of what he knew from the letters, what he still had questions about, what he thought might be answered by the remaining documents. There was a spiral notebook, not the bundle of letters, but a separate notebook, school composition style, that they'd set aside the first time. Michael opened it now. It was a journal. Not daily, not even regular, but a series of entries over what appeared to be a span of 3 years, written in the same wide, slightly uneven script. Rachel sat across from Michael and watched him read. She didn't read it herself. These were not her words to read. She drank her coffee and talked to Phyllis about the diner and the town and the spring, and from the corner of her attention she watched Michael's face as he read, the careful, controlled face doing its work, and underneath it, things moving. He read for an hour. He was very still when he closed the notebook. He came here to get a fresh start, he said. He'd been in 3 different places after he left Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia. He came here because someone he worked with in Georgia mentioned Morrow Falls, and he stopped for gas on the way through and liked it. He looked at the closed notebook. He says in one entry that he started coming to the diner because it reminded him of our mother's kitchen, the smell of it, the particular kind of warmth. Phyllis was quiet. Rachel said carefully, "Your mother, she died when Daniel was 15, I was 23. He set the notebook on his knee. After she died, Daniel and we held each other together for a while. And then I got the company started and it took over and he stopped. He was 18 when I got really busy. He was 18 and I had a company to build and I left him to it." Rachel held her coffee cup. She thought about a 15-year-old who lost his mother and an older brother who buried himself in work and an 8-year gap that became more space than either of them knew how to cross. "He was looking for the kitchen," she said. "Yes," Michael said. His voice was very quiet. "He found it here." The afternoon was still around them. Phyllis had gotten up quietly to refresh their coffees, the practiced tact of someone who understood when a room needed a little motion that wasn't about the conversation. Rachel thought about Booth 7. She thought about a young man coming in every Friday for years, eating his breakfast, talking to Gretchen Hadley, leaving $5 tips with instructions to give them to whoever needed them. She thought about what it meant to recreate a warmth you'd lost, to find a counter and a smell and a quality of light that came close enough to the original to let you breathe. "He made a home here," she said. "Yes." Michael looked at her. His eyes had something in them that was new. Not fresh grief, she didn't think, but a grief that had been examined, that had been turned over and looked at from new angles, until it was no longer just weight, but also somehow the weight of something that mattered. He was happy here. The later journal entries, he was making friends. He had plans. He was happy. "That's Michael, that's good." "I know." He looked at the journal. It's both things. The waste of it, and also that he found something. That he was okay. He was quiet. "I spent 4 years believing he died in misery, in loss. I've been sitting in that booth and grieving a story that turned out not to be entirely true." "Most stories turn out not to be entirely true," Rachel said. He looked at her. "Including the one where I'm only the villain." "Including that one," she agreed. They looked at each other across Phyllis's small living room in the afternoon light of a Tennessee spring day, with Daniel's journal on Michael's knee and all the discovered truth of him between them. And Rachel thought, there it is. Not the romance of movies and proposals, nothing like that, but the specific quiet recognition of 2 people who have arrived at the same understanding at the same moment. Which was that grief was not simple, that blame was not simple, that people were not simple, and that being in the presence of someone who understood all of that and didn't require simplicity of you was something rare and worth acknowledging. Michael reached across and put his hand over hers on the arm of Phyllis's chair. "Just for a moment, just briefly." She turned her hand over and held his. Just that, just briefly. It was enough. She was driving home from Phyllis's. Michael had gone in the other direction. He was staying somewhere in Harwick when her phone rang. She pulled over to look at it because she wasn't someone who answered her phone while driving, and the name on the screen was Patsy. Patsy didn't call on Saturday afternoons. Patsy was usually with her sister on Saturday afternoons. Rachel answered. I need to tell you something, Patsy said. Her voice was even the way her voice got when she was delivering information that was going to be hard to receive and didn't want to make it harder by adding emotion to it. I found out today. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't know until today. Rachel sat in the parked car. Tell me. The building, Patsy said. The building on the corner of Main and Caldwell. I've been renting it from the Grover estate. Frank's brother has been handling it since Frank died. But there was a development company. She stopped. Dennis Grover sold the building 6 weeks ago, Rachel. He sold it without telling me, without telling anyone. The new owners, they're based in Nashville. They've been approved for a demolition permit. The evening light was coming through the windshield. The dogwoods at the end of the street were still green, still holding. How long? Rachel said. They've given me 90 days from the first of the month. Rachel stared at the street. She thought about Patsy's late husband, Frank, building the booths by hand. She thought about the black and white tile, and the oscillating fans, and the strong coffee, and the lost and found shelf, and the photograph that had started all of this. She thought about Daniel Harrington, who had come here because of a smell, because of a quality of warmth that reminded him of somewhere he'd lost. She thought about Booth 7. Okay, she said. I'm coming over.
Yeah.
Patsy's living room was small and comfortable and full of the evidence of a long life lived in one place. Photographs on the walls, a quilt on the armchair, the particular accumulation of things that don't get sorted because they don't need to be sorted. They're right where they belong. Patsy poured Rachel coffee from the pot on the kitchen counter, and they sat across from each other, and Patsy told her the whole of it. Dennis Grover was Frank's younger brother, 73 years old, living in Chattanooga, and he had apparently been getting inquiries from the Nashville Development Company for the better part of a year. He hadn't told Patsy because, as best as Patsy could reconstruct it, he hadn't wanted a conversation about it. He'd sold when the number was right and notified her through a letter that had arrived that morning from a law firm. Does he know what the building means? Rachel said. He knows it's the diner, Patsy said. He's eaten here. He came to Frank's birthday dinner here. She looked at her coffee. He knows. Then why? Because it's money, Patsy said without bitterness. And he's 73 and the building needs work and it's money. She looked at Rachel. I don't hate him for it. I'm very angry right now, but I don't hate him for it. Rachel thought about the revenue numbers. She thought about the bypass. She thought about 6 months, maybe 8, and the fact that 90 days and 6 months were different timelines for the same ending. What are your options? She said. I've been thinking about that all day. Patsy set down her cup. I can try to buy the building from the development company, but the numbers they paid and the markup they'd require, I can't do it. Not even close. Legal challenge. My lawyer says the permit was filed correctly. I have a lease until December, which means I have until December to operate, but they can demolish after that. December. Rachel did the math. That's 7 months. Yes? They sat with the weight of that. The quilt on the armchair. The photographs on the walls. Frank Grover in one of them, standing in front of the booths he'd built, looking pleased with himself in the simple way of a man who had made something useful with his hands. I've been thinking, Patsy said carefully, about a different kind of solution. Not buying the building, moving. Rachel looked at her. There's the old hardware store on Whitfield. The Parsons family, their son, has been looking for a tenant for 2 years. It needs work, but the bones are there. She looked at the photograph of Frank. It wouldn't be the same, but it might be a diner. Rachel thought about the black and white tile. The maple booths? The booth that had been booth 7. The booths, she said. I know. Could we move them? Patsy looked at her with an expression that was something between gratitude and grief. They were built in place, she said. Frank built them in place to move them? I don't know. Someone would know, Rachel said. Or someone could figure it out. She thought about Michael, who ran a logistics company that handled the movement of large and complicated things. She thought about that and set it aside deliberately because she did not want to immediately convert him into a resource, which was something she'd been thinking about ever since he'd talked about money as a reflex. Let me think, she said, about options. Give me a week to think. Patsy nodded. She refilled Rachel's coffee without asking. Rachel drank it and sat in Patsy's small living room and thought about how many things were apparently in the process of changing at once. She called Michael the next morning. She had his number. He'd given it to her in January when they were coordinating the visit to Phyllis's house, and she had not used it except once a brief logistical text about timing. He answered on the second ring. "The diner's being sold for demolition," she said without preamble. A pause. "When?" 90 days from the first of the month. There's a lease until December, but after that..." She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee. "Patsy found out yesterday." "Where's the property going?" "Nashville Development Company." "New building, I assume. I don't know what." She heard him thinking the quality of silence that was active, the silence of a mind working. "What does Patsy want?" he said. "She's thinking about moving the operation. There's a space on Whitfield. But she'd need help with the planning, the renovation, probably the logistics of moving what can be moved." "The booths," he said immediately. "Yes, those can be moved. It's a project, it's not simple, but it can be done." Another pause. "Rachel, I want to help with this, but I want to help correctly." "What does that mean?" "It means I don't want to come in and write a check and have Patsy feel like she's been rescued. I want to, if there's a way to be useful that doesn't make her feel smaller." "That's the right instinct," Rachel said. "Talk to her, find out what she actually needs and what she'd accept, and then let me know. I'll figure out how to fit the help to that." Rachel looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, the bird feeder with its seeds. A chickadee was on it, efficient and unconcerned. "Okay," she said. "And Rachel..." A pause. "I'm sorry about the diner. I know what it means." She thought about Booth 7. She thought about Daniel finding his mother's kitchen. She thought about what a place could mean when it was the fixed point in a life that had lost its fixed points. "I know you know," she said. "Bah." Telling Noah about the diner's situation was easier than she expected and harder than she'd hoped, which was usually how things went with her grandson. He listened. He asked a question about the legal situation, specifically about whether the permit could be contested, that was sharp enough that she blinked. He had been, she realized, paying attention to adult problems long enough that he had a functional understanding of how certain systems worked, which was both useful and the product of circumstances she wished had been different. "Can you fight it?" he said. The permit was filed correctly. Fighting it would mean finding a procedural issue, and Patsy's lawyer doesn't see one. "What about the building on Whitfield?" "It's an option." "Would it still be the same diner?" Rachel thought about this. "It would still be Patsy's diner," she said, "with the same people and the same food. Some of the furniture might make it." She paused. "It wouldn't be the same building." Noah looked at this for a moment with those thoughtful eyes. "Buildings aren't the diner," he said. "The people are the diner." Rachel thought about a 71-year-old woman who had been wiping down the same counter for 30 years. She thought about Donna and her cheerful romanticism and her plans that hadn't yet arrived. She thought about Carla, who had been reliable and steady and skeptical and absolutely essential for 11 years. She thought about Michael Harrington sitting in booth 7 in the back corner looking out at the parking lot. "You're right," she said. "I'm going to tell all my friends to eat there," Noah said, "this month." Rachel looked at him. "It's not enough," he said with the particular clarity of a teenager who didn't deal in false comfort. "But it's something I can do." "Yes," Rachel said, "it is." She thought about what Shelley had said. Sometimes complicated is just the word we use when we know something and we're not ready to say it out loud. She thought about all the things she knew and was not yet saying out loud, and she thought that maybe it was time to start. The first Friday of July was a hot morning, the Tennessee summer settling in properly. The diner's oscillating fans working at capacity, the smell of coffee and griddle butter hanging in the warm air, the way it did on the best and worst of summer mornings. Rachel had come in early. She'd been coming in early for weeks, spending an extra hour before the shift started, doing the informal accounting of her own feelings that she'd been putting off. She had been putting off a great deal. The diner was fuller than it had been. Noah's social media efforts, combined with the story in the Harwick newspaper about the demolition plans, had produced what Rachel thought of as a sympathy rush. People who hadn't eaten at Patsy's in years came back to eat there again. It was, as Noah had said, not enough to change the outcome, but it was something. Michael came in at his usual time. She saw him come through the door, and she thought, "I know his walk now. I know the specific quality of his stillness. I know how he drinks coffee and how he eats when something is weighing on him, and how he looks when he's found something in the letters that has shifted something in him." She thought, "I've been thinking about what Shelley said for 2 months, and I'm not going to keep not saying it." She poured his coffee. She set down his order in 10 minutes. She was back 10 minutes after that with the check and a refill, and she sat down across from him without being asked. "I want to say something," she said. He looked at her. "Over this past year and a half," she said, Whatever this has been between us. I want to acknowledge it. She kept her voice even. Not because she wasn't feeling anything, she was feeling a great deal, actually, but because she'd learned that even was not the same as cold, and that acknowledging something didn't require making a production of it. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know it's real. And I know it matters to me. Michael looked at her across the table. The gray eyes, the careful face. And then slowly, the thing that happened when something landed close to home. It matters to me too, he said. A pause. He looked at the table. I haven't been in any kind of relationship since my wife died, 12 years. I've kept things at a distance. He looked up. I've been keeping you at a distance even while he stopped. Even while everything was getting less distant. I know, Rachel said. I don't know what I'm capable of. He was honest about the uncertainty which she found she preferred enormously to false confidence. But I know that when I leave here, I count the days until I come back. Rachel thought about 30 days. 30 days between First Fridays. She thought about the particular economy of waiting for something without being able to explain why you were waiting. I count them too, she said. She picked up her order pad. She stood up. At the edge of the booth, she looked back at him. Dinner, she said. Not at my house this time. An actual dinner. Somewhere with a tablecloth. He looked at her. The almost smile arrived finally without qualification. A real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and changed the whole structure of his face. She'd wondered for months what he looked like when he really smiled. He looked younger. He looked like he could still become things. Yes, he said. She went back to work. She was aware that Donna was watching her from the kitchen pass-through with an expression of restrained triumph, and that she would be hearing about it. She found she didn't mind. The dinner was a week later, a small Italian place in Harwick that had been there for 20 years and whose food was exactly what it had always been, and no better and no worse, which Rachel thought was its own kind of integrity. They had a table in the back, a real tablecloth wine that Michael ordered, and Rachel let herself enjoy without guilt. They talked for 3 hours. They talked about things they hadn't talked about in the diner, about his marriage, about the years after his wife died, about what it had been like to build a company and lose himself in it and wonder later whether the company had been a choice or a way of not having to make other choices. They talked about Rachel's divorce, about what the early years of it had been like, about the particular loneliness of being competent and thus presumed to be fine. She told him about the version of herself she'd been at 30, at 35 less careful, more willing to be hurt by things, and the way she'd slowly developed the caution that had protected her, and also at times kept her from what she actually wanted. What did you want? He asked. She looked at the tablecloth. She looked up. Someone who paid attention, she said. Someone who saw the actual things rather than the version of me it was convenient to see. Michael was quiet. You do that, she said. You see the actual things. So do you, he said. You've been doing it for a year and a half without making it a transaction. She thought about the first Friday, the man who sat alone and looked at a parking lot, the careful distance she'd maintained because distance was professional and correct and safe. She thought about how the distance had closed itself slowly, event by event, piece of information by piece of information, until one day she was sitting across from him in Phyllis Oates' living room, holding his hand and thinking, there it is. I wasn't always sure it wasn't a transaction, she said honestly. You were a customer. He's a regular. He's interesting. It's a slow Tuesday. That's how it starts. When did it change? She thought about the wrist, the coffee, the cold water. Most people find it easier to react than to actually help. She thought about the way he'd said her name was Daniel, with the full weight of a past tense he'd been carrying for years, offering it to her as if it were something she was qualified to hold carefully. February, she said. 2 Februaries ago, when I burned my wrist and you told me to run cold water. He looked at her across the candlelight. That was a minor incident. I know, but you helped rather than reacting. It was specific. It was the kind of specific that told me you were paying attention to actual things rather than performing attention. She paused. I started paying attention to you after that. The real kind. He reached across his table and covered her hand with his. She let it stay. She thought, this is the thing I've been filing under things to examine when I have more information. She thought, I have more information now. She turned her hand over and held his the way she had in Phyllis's armchair, but this time without the contingency of briefly. Outside, the Harwick night was warm and the street was quiet, and somewhere across town, Daniel Harrington's old landlord was probably watching television, and the former waitress who had taken $5 tips and given them to the people who needed them was probably asleep in some well-earned rest. And the town of Morrow Falls was holding its breath slightly about a diner that didn't want to close, and Rachel Morgan was sitting at a table with a tablecloth holding the hand of a man who counted the days between seeing her. She thought it doesn't have to be anything more than it is right now. Right now is enough, she thought, but I think it's going to become more. And I'm not afraid of that. She was somewhat afraid of that. She was also, for the first time in a long time, willing to be. The relapse happened in July. Shelley called on a Thursday evening, not Sunday, not the established call time, and Rachel heard it immediately in her daughter's voice. Not the drug itself, but the aftermath of it, the raw, scraped quality of someone who has done something and knows it, and is still in the raw moments after knowing. The particular combination of shame and relief that Rachel had learned over a decade of careful listening to distinguish from other things. "I'm okay," Shelley said first, which meant she wasn't or wasn't yet, but was trying. "Tell me," Rachel said. She listened for 20 minutes while her daughter told her. A work event, a colleague with a prescription, one decision that unmade several months of other decisions. Shelley was back at the treatment center, had self-reported immediately, was back in intensive programming. She was calling, she said, because she didn't want Rachel to find out some other way. She was calling because she'd promised herself that this time, the post-relapse time, she would not hide. "Does Noah know?" Rachel asked. "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first." Rachel sat on the back porch in the July dark and thought about all the things she was feeling, which were complex and simultaneous and didn't resolve cleanly into anything simple. She was afraid. She was sad. She was unsurprised in a way she hated, feeling the terrible exhaustion of having been unsurprised too many times. She was also, beneath all of that, aware of a specific respect for the fact that Shelley had called, that she'd self-reported, that she'd said, "I promised myself I would not hide." "Shelley," she said, "I'm glad you called." A shaky breath. "I know I let him down. It's going to be hard. But he's tough. He's tough because of you. He's tough because of himself," Rachel said. "And also because of you. Even this calling instead of hiding, he'll know about that. He'll know you called." Shelley was quiet. "You're still here," Rachel said. "That matters." It's not nothing, Shelley." After she hung up, Rachel stayed on the porch for a long time. She thought about cycles and about how people, real people, not fictional ones, didn't often recover in straight lines. They recovered in the messy, imperfect start and stop way of actual humans who are actually trying, and the measure of it wasn't whether they fell, but what they did when they landed. She thought about Michael and the 25 years of a case he'd been building against himself, and how even now, with the letters read and the truth known, the work was not done. She thought about herself and the years of careful distance that had been self-protection and also self-limitation, and how she was still working on the difference. She thought nobody heals clean. Nobody heals all at once. That's not failure. That's just what healing is. She went inside and knocked on Noah's door. He took it better than she expected. He also took it worse than she hoped, which was to say he listened and he was quiet and he said, "She called herself." "Yes?" She didn't wait until she had to tell me. "No?" He looked at the wall above his desk. "Okay," he said. "It's not okay," Rachel said carefully. "No," he agreed. "But she called. She called herself." He looked at Rachel. His eyes were the eyes of someone who had been adding evidence to a case for years. And this was new evidence, not the hoped-for kind, but real, and he was going to evaluate it accurately. "That's different from before." "Yes," Rachel said. "It is." He looked at the wall. I'm not going to stop hoping," he said. Is that stupid?" "No," Rachel said. "That's exactly the right amount of hoping." He nodded. He turned back to his desk, to whatever he'd been working on, his English essay. She thought the one for the summer reading. She stood in his doorway for a moment. "We're going to get through this one," she said, "like we got through the others." He didn't turn around. "I know," he said. "We always do." She went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and let herself feel the weight of it, all of it, without managing it away. She felt it for 20 minutes properly. She thought about the advice the therapist had told Shelley. Tolerance of affect, just tolerating the feeling without immediately doing something about it. And she practiced it herself, sitting in the quiet of the July night, feeling everything she was feeling. Then she called Michael. She told herself she wasn't going to call Michael. She told herself this was a family matter and that the relationship, whatever it was too new to bring in yet. But she was sitting on the edge of her bed, and she wanted to talk to him, and she thought about all the years of not calling people because of what it might cost or what they'd think, or whether she was asking for too much, and she picked up the phone. He answered immediately. "Shelley relapsed," she said. "I'm sorry," he said. It was not a performance. It was the two words and nothing more, which was what she needed. She called me herself before anyone had to tell her. She self-reported and she called me. Rachel looked at her bedroom wall. "I keep telling myself that's the thing that matters." "It is the thing that matters," Michael said. "Not because it fixes anything, because it's evidence of who she wants to be." Rachel pressed her hand flat against the bedspread. "I'm tired," she said. "Not of Shelley, not of Noah, just tired." "I know," he said. "I didn't used to call people when I was tired. I used to just manage." "I know that too," he said. "You don't have to manage everything alone." She thought about how simple that was, how obvious it was, how many years she'd spent not understanding it. "I'm glad you exist," she said. A pause. "I'm glad I found booth 7, he said. She laughed a real laugh, the surprised kind. "That's the most indirect 'I'm glad I know you' I've ever heard." "I'm working on it," he said. She held the phone and felt in the midst of the tiredness and the grief and the complicated love of a mother who had a daughter still trying and a grandson making himself carefully brave, something else, a warmth that had nothing to do with the July heat, a particular rightness about a person existing on the other end of a phone call. She stayed on the phone for an hour. They didn't talk about anything momentous. They talked about Daniel's journal and about a book she'd been reading and about a thing Michael had noticed about the logistics industry that he found genuinely interesting and thought she might too, which was the kind of thing you only said to someone you'd stopped performing for. When she hung up, she got ready for bed. She slept better than she had any right to. August arrived. The diner situation had been quietly becoming more concrete. Patsy had toured the Whitfield Street building twice, both times with a contractor friend who gave her honest assessments, and both assessments had said the building is workable. It would take money and time, but it was workable. Patsy had done her own calculating the lease until December, at the current location the savings she had. The equipment that could be moved, and the numbers were not good enough to do it without outside help. But they were not so bad that outside help was unimaginable. Rachel had been thinking in the meantime about what help looked like and what form it should take. She had talked to Donna, who had turned out to have a more practical mind than her cheerful romanticism suggested, and who had said immediately, "Fundraiser, local fundraiser community investment. Patsy's is part of this town, and the town should have a stake in saving it." She had talked to Carla, who had said, "What we need is someone to do the work at cost or less. Materials are one thing, labor is the expensive part." She had talked finally to Michael, not to ask for money. She'd been very clear with herself about this before the conversation, not to ask for money, to ask for expertise. He ran a company that moved large things and managed complex logistics and had connections she didn't have. "I want to be useful," she told him. "Not a patron, useful." "Tell me what you need," he said. "Patsy needs to move equipment from Main Street to Whitfield. She needs someone who knows how to move booths that were built in place without destroying them. She needs renovation coordination that doesn't cost more than the renovation is worth." Rachel paused. I think she needs someone to look at her business model and tell her honestly whether the new location can work. Not to tell her what she wants to hear, to tell her the truth." Michael was quiet for a moment. "That's what I can actually help with," he said. "The logistics, the coordination, the honest assessment." Another pause. "Not writing a check." "Not writing a check," Rachel confirmed. "Will Patsy accept that?" "She'll accept expertise," Rachel said, "from a professional who respects what she's built. She won't accept being saved by money, but she'll accept being helped by people who know things she doesn't." "Okay," he said. "Arrange an introduction." She did. The meeting between Patsy Guthrie and Michael Harrington took place at Patsy's kitchen table on a Saturday morning in late August. Rachel was there. She sat to the side, which she understood was the right positioning. She was the bridge, not the conversation itself. Patsy looked at Michael with the eyes she used when she was evaluating something, not unfriendly, not skeptical, exactly, just precise. She had done her own research. She knew who he was. "You've been eating here for 2 years, she said. "Yes," Michael said. "Why?" He told her, the whole of it, the way he'd told Rachel in pieces over 18 months. The falling out, the loss, Daniel's years in Morrow, Falls, the diner, and what it had meant. Patsy listened, the way she listened to everything fully, without interrupting, with the genuine attention of someone who had spent 30 years behind a counter, learning to hear what people were actually saying. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So this place was his home," she said. "Yes. And you've been coming here to feel connected to him?" "Yes." Patsy looked at the table. She looked at Rachel. She looked at Michael. "Well," she said, "that settles whether you have a stake in what happens to it." He almost smiled. "I believe it does. Now tell me about these booths," Patsy said. "Because if I have to leave those booths behind, I might need to reconsider the whole enterprise." "You don't have to leave the booths behind," Michael said. "I've consulted with 2 people in the last week. The bench frames are bolted, not anchored. They can be unbolted and moved intact, provided you have the right team." He looked at her. "I have a crew in Harwick who does commercial relocations. They're good. They'll do it at cost. They owe me a favor, and I'm calling it." Patsy considered this. At cost. At cost, not a gift. A professional arrangement. Rachel watched her employer look at this offer from every angle. The way Patsy looked at everything, for the catch, for the thing underneath, for the real shape of what was being given. "And the assessment," Patsy said. "You'll tell me if it won't work." "I'll tell you if it won't work," Michael said. "I have no reason to tell you otherwise." "Most people have a reason," Patsy said. "They don't want to deliver bad news. They want to be the one who helped." "I've been practicing," Michael said, and Rachel heard the echo of the conversation she'd had with him months ago and the slight movement at the corner of his mouth. "All right," Patsy said. She extended her hand. "We'll try it." They shook hands across her kitchen table, and Rachel sat in the chair to the side and felt the particular satisfaction of having connected 2 good people without making herself the center of the connection. Noah disappeared on a Thursday in late September. Not disappeared in the worst sense. He was not missing. He was not in danger, but he left school at noon without permission and did not come home by 4, which was unusual enough that Rachel, when she got home from her shift, felt the particular cold water clarity of real alarm rather than ordinary worry. She called his phone. It went to voicemail. She called the school. He had been in class until noon and then had not been checked back in. She called Donna, who had sometimes given Noah rides, and who had not heard from him. She was considering calling the police not yet, but considering it when she remembered something Noah had said in passing 2 months ago about a place on the creek past the old railroad bridge where he sometimes went to think. He'd mentioned it once, and she'd filed it away in the way she filed away information about him, the particular careful filing of a person trying to understand someone who revealed things gradually. She got in the car. She found him on the creek bank 40 minutes later, sitting with his back against a sycamore tree and his shoes off his feet in the shallow water. He looked up when he heard her coming. He didn't look surprised. "I was going to text you," he said. "When?" she said. "In a little while." She sat down on the bank next to him. She took off her work shoes and put her feet in the creek, which was cold and clear and made her hiss slightly at the temperature. "What happened?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "The creek went over its rocks with the patient sound of water that has been doing something for a long time and has no intention of stopping. My mom called the school," he said. "The counselor. To check in on me, I guess. They called me out of class, and the counselor sat me down and told me that my mother had called and was thinking of me." He looked at the water. "Everyone saw me get called out. And Marcus, the kid from before." He stopped. "He said something." "What did he say?" Noah's jaw moved. "He said that I must have problems at home, that I always looked like I did, that it made sense." Rachel looked at the water. "And I thought about hitting him again," Noah said. "I didn't, I just left." She sat with him in the quiet of the creek, the September warmth still in the air, the sycamore leaves beginning to think about changing. "You did the right thing," she said. "It doesn't feel that way." "No," she agreed. "The right thing mostly doesn't feel good in the moment. It just feels less bad in retrospect." He was quiet. He moved his feet in the water. "I'm embarrassed," he said, "about all of it. About my mom. About needing to be checked on. About being the kid who got called out of class." "I know. It's not fair." "No," Rachel said. "It's genuinely not fair." He looked at her. "Are you going to tell me it gets better?" "I'm going to tell you that you have more going for you than most people your age know what to do with," she said. "I'm going to tell you that the thing that embarrasses you right now, needing people, having people who love you enough to check in, is not actually a liability. It just feels like one." He looked at the water. Michael's like that, he said. Rachel looked at him. He needed something, Noah said, from the diner, from coming back, and he didn't pretend he didn't. He moved his feet. He told me that once, that pretending you don't need things is, he said, it's a kind of lie you tell yourself. Rachel thought about Michael in a rental car on Patsy Street coming on a Tuesday because he decided to do something before he could reconsider it. She thought about the book, the photograph, The Years of Monthly Vigil. She thought about a man who had built a very efficient life around not needing people and was slowly at 57 learning that efficiency was not the same as wholeness. He's right, she said. Noah nodded. He pulled his feet out of the water. He put on his socks and shoes. He stood up and offered her a hand, which she took, and he pulled her to her feet with the surprising strength of a teenager who had been quietly getting taller all year. They walked back to the car together. She called Michael from the driveway after Noah went inside while she was still sitting in the car. He's fine, she said. He ran away to a creek and sat there and thought about things. He's home. Good, Michael said. He quoted you, she said, about pretending you don't need things being a lie you tell yourself. A pause. When did I say that? I don't know, he said you told him once. Another pause. I should probably say things more carefully around perceptive 14-year-olds. He remembered it when he needed it, Rachel said. That's about as good as anything you could hope for. She heard something in the silence on the other end of the phone that she had learned over the past months to recognize as Michael, receiving something, taking it and actually taking it in, rather than deflecting it. Thank you for telling me, he said. Of course, she said. She went inside. Noah was at the kitchen table doing homework. She made dinner the chicken thing because it was a hard day, and the rotation was there for exactly this reason, and they ate together and talked about ordinary things, and she thought, this is what holding on looks like. Not the drama of it, just dinner and homework and two people who love each other getting through the day.
But
In early October, Michael called her. Not about the diner, not about Daniel. He called on a Tuesday evening, not scheduled, not contextual. And when she answered, he said, I want to tell you something. Okay, she said. I've been working on... He stopped. He started again. I've been doing what the therapist I finally agreed to see describes as grief work. I know that phrase sounds like something out of a brochure, but she uses it practically, and it's been useful. Rachel said nothing and waited. She asked me a few weeks ago what I was afraid of, he said, and I spent 2 sessions telling her practical things. That I was afraid of making the same mistakes again, of being emotionally unavailable, of asking too much of someone, of not asking enough. He paused. And then she said she asked me what I was afraid of if everything went right, if none of the mistakes happened. What was I afraid of then? Rachel waited. I told her I was afraid of deserving it, he said, of deserving something good, something real. After Daniel, after the way I operated for so many years, he paused. She said that was the real one. Rachel sat in her living room with the October night outside the window. You deserve things, she said. I want to be very clear about that. I know you believe that, he said. I'm working on believing it myself. Good, she said. A pause. He said, I'm going to come to Morrow Falls next weekend, not on a Friday, just to be there. If that's okay. It's okay, she said. I'd like to take you to dinner again. I'd like that too. Another pause, a comfortable one, the kind that didn't need to be filled. I haven't counted the days this month, he said. She smiled at the window. Why not? Because I stopped thinking of the diner as the destination, he said. She held the phone and felt the particular fullness of a moment that was quiet and ordinary and entirely what it needed to be. I'll see you Saturday, she said. Yes, he said. You will.
but
It was November the 1st Friday. The first anniversary of the first real conversation when Michael said he'd found something. Not in the letters. In Daniel's journal, in one of the entries they had not read closely on the first pass in Phyllis's living room because the handwriting was small and the light had been going. He'd had the relevant page photographed and had spent 2 weeks going back to it. He had it with him in booth 7 on that November Friday, and he slid it across the table when Rachel sat down. She read it. Daniel had written it 3 months before he died. He was talking about a conversation he'd had with someone at the diner. Gretchen Hadley, she thought, or someone like Gretchen about his brother. He'd told the person that he'd written letters he'd never sent. He told her that he had stopped waiting for something to change, some external thing, some event, some catalyst, and had decided instead to simply hold the love as it was. Not as a wound, as a fact. My brother existed and I loved him. And that is true regardless of what happened after. And then at the end of the entry in writing that had the quality of something thought about for a long time and then written quickly, if he ever finds this. If someone tells him about these pages years from now, I want him to know the booth is his. It always was. He just hasn't sat in it yet. Rachel set the page down. Michael was watching her. He was waiting, Michael said. Even when he said he'd stopped waiting, he'd imagined this. He imagined that someone would tell me about the booth, that I'd find the letters. He looked at the table. He knew me well enough to know I would come back to the thing that connected us, that I wouldn't stay away. Rachel looked at booth 7, the worn maple bench, the window in the parking lot, and the silver-like quality of the November morning. She thought about all the people who had passed through this corner Daniel years ago, Michael for the past 2 years, herself for 11. And before them, other people, other mornings, other conversations that had mattered and been forgotten and mattered still regardless. He left it for you, she said. Yes, Michael said. She looked at him across the table. He was looking at the page. There was something in his face that she had not seen before, not the weight lifting exactly, but a quality of arriving somewhere. The particular expression of a man who has been traveling for a long time and has just understood that he's found the right place. Michael, she said. He looked up. He knew you'd come back, she said. He knew it about you. He counted on it. She paused. That's not the story of a man who stopped loving his brother. That's the story of a man who loved his brother so much he built the return trip into the leaving. He held her gaze, the gray eyes with something in them that was changed, not repaired, not resolved. Those words were wrong, more like a room that has been closed for a long time and has finally been opened, and the air coming in is the ordinary air of the world, and the room is going to be the better for it. I know, he said. I finally know that. Outside the first Friday of November, the Main Street dogwoods were bare, and the sky was low and gray, and the parking lot was quiet. Patsy's Diner was going to close in December in the building on the corner of Main and Caldwell, and in the spring it was going to open on Whitfield Street in the building that used to be a hardware store with the maple booths reassembled, and the black and white tile recreated, and the same coffee, and the same oscillating fans, and all the same people. Booth 7 was going to be Booth 7 wherever it was. That Rachel thought was the whole story. She heard the door open and turned. Donna was coming in for her shift, still unwrapping her scarf, her cheeks pink from the November air. Carla was already in the kitchen starting the prep. From the direction of Whitfield Street, 14 blocks away across the town, the renovation of the hardware store was in week 3. Michael's crew from Harwick working steadily through the autumn days. I'll get you more coffee, Rachel said. Thank you, Michael said. She went to get it, and she thought about Daniel's entry, the booth is his. It always was. He just hasn't sat in it yet. She thought, and now he has. And now he is. And now he's not sitting in it alone. She brought the coffee back. She poured it. She went back to work. In the window of booth 7, the reflection of a man sat with both hands around a warm cup and watched the November street with the expression at last, after a long time, of someone who has arrived somewhere. The cliffhanger arrived, not dramatically, but practically on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks later, when Shelley called Rachel's phone and spoke in the clear, tired voice she'd had since August. Working voice, she'd started thinking of it, the voice of someone doing the work, and said, Mom, I need to talk to you about something, about Noah. Rachel sat down in her kitchen chair. He called me, Shelley said. Last week. He called me himself. He wanted to tell me about his English essay. Miss Reardon entered it in a state competition. He wanted to tell me before you did. Shelley's voice had something in it Rachel could not quite name. He said he wanted me to know when things went right, not just when things were hard. Rachel put her hand over her mouth. I don't know what you said to him, Shelley said, but whatever you said, whatever you've been doing. She stopped. Thank you, Mom. Rachel sat in her kitchen in the November evening with the bird feeder outside the window and the warm house around her. And the evidence, all the evidence accumulated over 2 years of small changes and hard work and people trying, and she thought, it's not finished. It's never finished. But it's real. It's happening. Something is genuinely actually changing. That was enough. That was more than enough. She said, tell me what he said. December came, and with it, the particular quiet of a month that knew it was ending something. The diner on Main and Caldwell served its last customers on December 23rd. Patsy had decided on that date deliberately. She wanted the last day to be a weekday, a regular day, A day that felt like the end of something rather than a ceremony about it being the end of something. She'd made a small announcement in the Harwick paper. Nothing elaborate, and the result was a crowd unlike any the diner had seen since the early years, people who'd grown up eating there. People who'd had first dates in the booths and job interview breakfasts and Sunday mornings over 30 years of Sundays. They came all through the day from opening to the 3 o'clock close Patsy had announced. Rachel worked the whole day. She'd worked every day of December that she was scheduled, and a few she wasn't because there was something that felt important about being present for all of it. She refilled coffees and took orders and wiped down tables and felt at various points throughout the day a whole range of things that she didn't try to organize or resolve. She was sad. She was also glad. Glad for the people who came. Glad for the table full of women who had been meeting for Tuesday breakfast for 22 years and who came in on a Wednesday in December to mark the occasion. Glad for the retired men at the counter who stayed for 3 hours and talked about everything except the fact that they were staying longer than usual. Glad for Donna, who had found in this situation a kind of rallying energy and who had brought flowers. Actual flowers, a bunch of sunflowers, because it was December and sunflowers were wrong for December, and also exactly right. Glad for Carla, who worked with the same steady efficiency she'd always worked with, and cried once at the end of her shift and said, when Rachel noticed, I'm fine, I'm just fine, in a way that meant she was underneath the grief, actually fine. Michael came in at noon. He sat in booth 7. He ordered as usual. He ate all of it. Rachel brought him his check and sat down across from him the last time she'd be able to do that in this particular booth, in this particular building. And they sat for a few minutes while the diner moved around them, the particular warmth and sound of a place that had a lot of people in it and was being felt while it was still there to be felt. Are you okay? She said. Yes, he said. I'm actually okay. He looked around at the diner, the full tables, the sound of it. I thought today would feel like losing something else, he said, but it doesn't. It feels like... He stopped. He looked at the window, the parking lot, the December sky. It feels like the next thing. It is the next thing, Rachel said. I know. He looked at her. I'm not visiting the next version to feel close to Daniel. I'm visiting it because... He paused. Because this is where you work. And Noah eats lunch there sometimes. And it's where Patsy and Donna and Carla are. He looked at the table. It stopped being about the dead and started being about the living. Rachel held that. Good, she said. That's good. I know, he said. I'm still getting used to it. She squeezed his hand across the table briefly, the gesture they'd developed for the public context of the diner, which was not the same as the private context of a restaurant in Harwick, but was its own kind of telling. She went back to work. At 3 o'clock, Patsy locked the door of the building on the corner of Main and Caldwell for the last time. She stood on the sidewalk with her keys in her hand. She didn't say anything. She looked at the diner for a while, the window, the sign, the closed door. Then she turned around. Whitfield Street isn't going to renovate itself, she said. I need coffee. And they went. The last letter, the one Michael had mentioned in October, the one he'd said was coming, arrived in February. Not a letter from Daniel. A letter from a lawyer in Lexington, Kentucky, representing the estate of a man Rachel had never heard of, William Harrington Michaels, and Daniel's father, who had died 3 months earlier at the age of 89. Michael told her about it in March on the first Friday after he'd had time to go through the estate papers and understand what they contained. The Whitfield Street Diner was open by then, booth 7, in its new position near the back, left by the window that looked out onto the back alley rather than a parking lot, which was different, and also in time would be fine. The maple bench gleamed. The coffee was the same. He left a letter, Michael said, in his papers with instructions to be delivered after his death. To you, to me, and he thought Daniel might still be alive. He'd lost track of both of us. The lawyer found me through the company. The letter was... He looked at his coffee. He was trying to reconcile too, from his end. He'd had a stroke 5 years ago, and he'd been trying to reach both of us. Rachel watched him. He wasn't a good father, Michael said. I don't want to rewrite that. He was absent and critical, and there were reasons Daniel and I held each other together, and he was one of them. He looked up. But the letter he knew about the falling out. He said he blamed himself. He said he'd watched the two of us become the way we handled conflict, The way neither of us knew how to stay was something we'd learned. From him, Rachel said. From him. He turned the coffee cup. He says in the letter, he says he learned it from his own father, that it was a kind of inheritance. He paused. He calls it a bad inheritance. He says he's sorry. Rachel thought about all the ways the same patterns reproduce themselves across generations. The silence, the managing alone, the building of cases against oneself, the inability to cross the distances that love and fear created between people. She thought about Shelley, who had learned it from watching Rachel perform competence. She thought about Noah, who had learned to be careful from watching both of them. She thought about the slow generational work of unlearning. "What are you going to do with it?" she said. The letter. He thought about it. "I've been asking myself that for 3 months." He looked at the window, the alley, the thin light of a March morning. I think I'm going to write back, even though he's dead." He looked at her. "I think I'm going to write a letter I don't send the way Daniel did. Not because I can't forgive him, but because saying it matters even if there's no one to receive it." Rachel looked at him. "Daniel knew something about that," she said. "Yes," Michael said, "he really did." But that spring the class state competition results came back. Noah's essay, the one Ms. Reardon had entered, the one Noah had called his mother to tell her about, placed third in the state in the 11th grade literary division, which meant there was a small certificate and a mention in the Harwick paper. Ms. Reardon sent a note home. Shelley called when she heard from her clean apartment in Knoxville 10 months sober. Noah came to the diner on a Saturday afternoon. He came fairly regularly now, partly because Rachel worked there, and partly because he'd developed an attachment to the Whitfield Street incarnation in the way teenagers sometimes attach to third places, places that were neither home nor school. And he sat in a booth near the window and did his homework and ate a piece of apple pie and accepted the congratulations of Donna and Carla with the slightly abashed grace of someone who had worked for something and still found the acknowledgement surprising. Michael came in that afternoon, too. Not his first Friday, just a Saturday, which had become more common. He slid into the booth across from Noah, and they talked for 20 minutes while Rachel was on the floor, occasional words reaching her through the diner's sounds. She caught some of it. Michael saying something about the essay, asking what it was about. Noah saying she caught this part clearly. It was about the difference between being alone and being lonely. About how they look the same from the outside but feel completely different. A pause. Then Michael's voice lower, saying something she couldn't quite hear. Noah's face when she glanced over was the face of someone receiving information they already knew but hadn't heard said out loud before. She thought he needed to hear it from someone other than me. She thought that's what Michael is. For both of us. She thought that's enough. That's exactly enough. But the first Friday in May, Patsy's Diner on Whitfield Street opened for its first busy season. The dogwoods along Main Street were visible from the new building's front window, not as close as before, but there a block and a half away, white and certain in the early May morning. The black and white tile was new but the same pattern. The oscillating fans were the same fans. The coffee was the same coffee. Booth 7 was in the back left by the window. The maple bench gleamed. The specific creak it had developed 3 years ago was still there. The crew from Harwick had offered to fix it, and Patsy had said leave it. Michael came in at 7:45. He sat in booth 7. He ordered 2 eggs over medium wheat toast, dry, hash browns, orange juice. Rachel brought his coffee. She looked at him across booth 7. This man she'd been learning for 2 years. This man who had arrived carrying what she'd slowly come to understand was not so much grief as the weight of a story. He'd been telling himself wrong, and who had slowly, over the months, begun to tell it differently. And she thought, there you are. Welcome back, she said. He looked up, the gray eyes, the real smile, the one that changed his whole face, and which she had seen often enough now that it no longer surprised her, though it still did something. Thank you, he said. She poured his coffee and went back to work. And the May morning came through the windows of the Whitfield Street diner, and the maple booths held the light the way old things do, and the coffee was strong, and everything was going to continue being complicated, and also everything was in the true and quiet sense going to be fine. The unopened box arrived in June. Michael had been working with the Lexington attorney on the estate for 3 months. The practical parts, the assets and accounts, and the modest inventory of a man who had lived frugally and alone in the eastern Kentucky town he'd never left. Most of it had been distributed or donated by April. But the attorney had flagged in a follow-up email a box of miscellaneous personal papers that he hadn't been sure were relevant to the estate and had held for Michael to review. Michael picked it up on a trip to Lexington he made for other reasons, a supplier in the city, a meeting he'd been putting off, and drove back to the hotel with it on the passenger seat. He didn't open it that night. He looked at it for a while and then ordered room service and watched whatever was on television and let the box be in the room. He opened it the following morning with coffee before the drive back. The box contained his father's things. The expected items, documents, old photographs, a watch that had been his grandfather's, a stack of Christmas cards bundled with a rubber band which Michael did not open. Underneath all of that, in a manila envelope with nothing written on the outside, was a collection of papers that Michael understood even before he opened them were the thing the attorney had not been sure about. They were letters. Not from his father. His father's handwriting had been small and cramped and barely legible, which Michael remembered, but the letters were written in a wider hand he recognized. Daniel had been writing to their father. Not many 4 letters, over 3 years, the last one postmarked 16 months before the accident. They were not sealed. They had been opened and read and kept. Michael sat on the hotel bed with the letters in his lap and thought he wrote to both of us. His father had received letters, had read them, had kept them, had apparently begun trying to reach out himself before the stroke that had finally catalyzed his own attempt at reconciliation. He read the letters. Daniel in the first letter was angry. He was 24. He'd been gone for 2 years, and the anger was the real kind, not melodramatic, not theatrical, but the precise and legitimate anger of a person cataloging specific grievances with the accuracy of someone who has had 2 years to order them. He told their father about the ways the house had felt, the silence, the criticism that came without accompanying belief, the way both boys had learned early that affection was conditional and that the conditions were never quite clearly stated. In the second letter, the anger was still there, but something else had come in alongside it. Understanding. Not excusing Daniel was careful about the difference. Careful in the way that the journal entries had suggested. He was careful about truth, but understanding the kind that comes from getting old enough to see backward and recognize that the person who failed you was also failed by someone else. In the third letter, which was dated 4 years after the first, Daniel told his father he was in Tennessee. He was brief about the details, a town, a job, a diner he liked. He said he didn't need anything. He said he was writing because he wanted his father to know he was okay. The fourth letter was the last one. Michael read it twice. Daniel had written it at the diner. He said so in the first line. I'm sitting in my booth at Patsy's. It's a Friday morning, and I'm going to try to say the thing I've been not saying. The handwriting was the handwriting of someone who had made a decision and was writing before the decision could change. Wide, slightly uneven, the same hand that had written on the back of a photograph that Michael had found in a book in a lost and found shelf in Tennessee. He told their father about Michael. He said, I don't know if you and Michael are in contact. I don't think you are. But I want you to know if you ever talk to him that I don't want him to blame himself. He did what he did because he was trying to help the way he knew how. That's the whole truth of it. He was trying to help me and he didn't know the right way. And I didn't know how to tell him. I've been living for a long time with the idea that he rejected me, and I've been slowly understanding that that's not the whole story. He was scared too. We were both scared. He wrote, I'm not ready to call him yet. I don't know if I'll get there, but I want someone to know in case I don't get there that I don't blame him. I love him. I've always loved him. That's the thing that didn't change. Michael sat in the hotel room in Lexington, Kentucky, with the letters in his lap and the June morning coming through the window of a city where his father had lived and died and his brother had grown up and left, and from a considerable distance had tried repeatedly to say the things that the family he'd come from had never learned to say. He did not cry. Or he did cry briefly, the controlled kind, the kind that happened when the weight was real and acknowledged rather than suppressed or performed. He let it happen, and then it was done. He held the last letter. He read the last line again. I love him. I've always loved him. That's the thing that didn't change. He thought about the booth. He thought about the Friday mornings and the years of vigil and the way grief could become, if you let it, a kind of conversation with someone who was no longer there, a conversation that was real, that mattered, that changed you even without a response. He thought about Rachel. He thought about sitting in booth 7 on a December morning while the diner held its last crowd of the last day, and the feeling that it was not lost, that it was somehow the next thing. He thought about the difference between visiting a place to stay close to the dead and visiting a place because the living were there. He put the letters back in the envelope. He put the envelope in the box. He got in the car and drove back to Tennessee. He came directly to the diner. It was a Thursday. He was not scheduled to be in Morrow Falls until the following Friday. Rachel saw his car in the Whitfield Street parking lot and felt a small shock of surprise and then quickly something else. She knew. From the way he walked through the door. Not badly, he wasn't broken, he wasn't in crisis, but the walk of someone who was carrying something new and had come to a specific place to set it down. She poured a coffee. She walked to booth 7. He sat down. She set the coffee in front of him. She sat down. He put the manila envelope on the table. He told her about the box. He told her about the letters. He told her what Daniel had written to their father, the progression of them, the anger and the understanding and the Tennessee letters and the Friday morning booth and the final thing. When he finished, the diner was quiet around them. The Thursday mid-morning lull, Donna at the counter with a crossword, Carla in the kitchen. The new window and its view of the back alley and the thin June sky. He wrote it in this booth, Rachel said. Yes. She looked at the maple bench, the window, the particular quality of the light. He was sitting right here, she said, writing to your father, writing about you. She looked at Michael. He was sitting where you sit, and he was thinking about you, and he was trying to get the truth across a distance he didn't know how to close. She paused. And then you came and sat in the same spot, trying to get across the same distance. Michael looked at the table. The booth was the connection, Rachel said. Both directions. Yes, he said quietly. I keep thinking about that he chose this place, and so did I independently without knowing, and that the choice pointed at the same thing. He looked up. I don't have a way to make that not feel significant. You don't have to make it not feel significant, Rachel said. It is significant. He held her gaze across the table. The gray eyes, the real ones, the ones she'd been reading for 2 years. I'm done with the case against myself, he said. She was quiet. I'm not saying I don't carry responsibility. I do. I made real mistakes with real consequences, and I'm going to carry that. He looked at the envelope. But the case, the one I was building, the one where I was only the villain, I'm done with that. He looked at her. He said I was scared. He was right. I was scared, and I made a scared person's decisions, and I've been paying a scared person's interest on it ever since. He paused. I don't want to pay that anymore. Rachel thought about all the things she'd been paying interest on. The careful distance, the managed competence, the years of not calling people when she was tired. She thought about what she'd said to Shelley. I needed people. I was afraid of what needing them would cost. Nobody gets out free, she said. The mistakes happened. The losses happened. I know. But you can stop using those things as a reason to stay away from what's good. She said it simply, not as a speech, as a thing she knew. You can't undo what happened. You can put it down. He was very still. I've been practicing putting things down, Rachel said. It turns out it's a skill. It gets easier. She paused. A little. He almost laughed. It arrived as a real sound, brief, surprised, genuine, and it changed his face the way his real smiles did. She thought she would never get tired of that change. A little, he said. A little, she confirmed. He picked up his coffee. He drank from it the real kind of drinking, not the holding without tasting kind. He set it down. He looked around the diner, the new walls, the old booths, the same fans, the morning light on the Whitfield Street black and white tile. I'd like to tell you something, he said. She waited. I came to this diner 2 years ago to feel close to someone I'd lost, he said. That was the whole plan. There was no other plan. He looked at her. And then there was someone in the diner who paid attention to actual things, and the plan stopped being enough. And then he paused. He looked at the table, looked up. I'm not good at this part, at saying the thing directly. Try, she said. I'm in love with you, he said. I have been for some time. I've been working up to saying it directly for several months, and I figured a Thursday in June with Daniel's letters on the table was as good a time as any. The diner was the same around them. Donna and her crossword. Carla in the kitchen. The fans. The coffee. Rachel looked at Michael Harrington, 59 years old now, gray at the temples, with the posture of a man who had been expected to command rooms and the eyes of a man who had been slowly, laboriously learning to see rooms instead of commanding them. And she thought about all the filed away things and all the things she'd already said out loud and all the things she still hadn't. "I've been in love with you since approximately March of last year," she said. "When you told me that Noah would hear your writing is good as something I was saying because I was his grandmother, but he'd hear the exact word promise as something that happened in the world." She paused. "That was the moment I stopped pretending it was something else." He looked at her. "I've been working up to saying it directly for significantly longer than several months," she added. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over and held it. "Okay?" he said. "Okay," she said. They sat in booth 7 in the June morning, and it was in all the ways that mattered exactly what it should be.
Chan.
The summer moved through its months, and the things that were in the process of changing continued to change. Shelley came for a week in July, her second visit, the first since the relapse, which she had now 8 months behind her. She and Noah went to the creek together, the two of them one afternoon, without Rachel, which Noah had proposed and which Rachel had refrained from commenting on, recognizing it as the kind of thing that needed to happen between them without management. They came back with the slightly subdued quality of people who had talked about real things and were still processing what they'd said. Shelley's eyes were red. Noah's were not quite, though they were close. "We're okay," Noah told Rachel that evening when she asked. It's going to take a long time, but we're okay." "That's the right pace," Rachel said. He looked at her. He said, "Is that what it was like with you, with Michael, a long time?" Yes, she said. 2 years of slow." He nodded as if confirming a hypothesis. "I think that's how it should work," he said. "The slow way. So you actually know what you're getting into." "That's wise," Rachel said. "I'm working on it," he said, and she heard the echo of Michael's phrase in his voice and felt the particular warmth of a phrase that had become without ceremony part of the family vocabulary. In September, Noah started high school. He went in wearing the expression of someone who had made a private decision to approach things differently than he had before. Not with false confidence, not with the performed ease of someone pretending to be less uncertain than they were, but with the particular quality of someone who had been afraid for a long time and had decided to be afraid while doing the thing anyway. He texted Rachel at noon, "Still here." She texted back, "I know." That evening, doing homework at the kitchen table, he said without looking up, "Michael said I should tell you about my day." Rachel looked at him. "When did he say that?" "He texted me. He said, 'Tell your grandmother about your day. She won't ask because she doesn't want to pressure you. So just tell her.'" Noah looked up. He's not wrong. Rachel sat down at the kitchen table. "Tell me about your day," she said. He told her. The whole of it. The classes, the good teacher and the less good teacher, the lunch period where he didn't know anyone yet, and the specific anxiety of that. The moment in English class when the teacher asked what everyone had read over the summer, and Noah had said a book about loss, and the teacher had said, "Say more about that," and he had. And the class had been quiet for a moment, and then a girl across the room had said, "I read something like that too." "That girl," Rachel said. "What's her name?" "Lena," Noah said. He looked back at his homework. She recommended 3 other books. They all sound good. Rachel held the table between her hands and thought, there you are. She thought about the book with the dog. It was sad, and then it wasn't as sad, and about a 14-year-old boy who had been carrying more than any boy that age should carry, and who had slowly, in the company of people who loved him and told him the truth, been finding the room to be who he was. She thought it happened. Not all at once. Not cleanly. But it happened. Michael came every first Friday. He also came on other days, Saturdays, sometimes Wednesdays, once on a Tuesday in October because he'd been in Harwick for a meeting and wanted coffee. He sat in booth 7. He drank the coffee. He ate the food, all of it, every time. He left a 20 on a $14 ticket. He and Rachel had dinner in Harwick most weeks. They had discovered a shared tolerance for the same kind of quiet, the comfortable kind, the kind that didn't require filling, and a shared discomfort with the same kind of performance, the social theater of pretending things were simpler or easier than they were. They talked about work and about Noah and about Daniel still because Daniel was part of the story, and the story was ongoing. They talked about what came next sometimes. Not with urgency, neither of them was in a hurry, and urgency had caused enough damage in both their lives that they'd developed a healthy skepticism of it. They talked about it the way you talk about a place you're planning to go when the time is right, describing it and thinking about it without booking the ticket yet. "What does it look like?" Rachel asked once. They were at the Italian place in Harwick, the usual table in the back, the tablecloth. When you think about it. Ordinary, he said, without hesitating. It looks ordinary. He looked at the tablecloth. I spent so much of my life in grand gestures, the company, the acquisitions, the... He paused. The gestures that substituted for presents. I want ordinary. I want a kitchen table. I want booth 7 on the first Friday. He looked up. I want Noah's English papers on the refrigerator even when he's 45. Rachel looked at him across the candlelight. She thought about the kitchen table on Whitfield Street and the refrigerator that already had Noah's state competition certificate on it, held by a magnetic letter N. That's achievable, she said. I think so, he said. He held her gaze. I know it takes time. We have time, she said. He smiled the real one. Yes, he said. We do. In December, 1 year after the old diner's last day, Rachel and Michael went back to the corner of Main and Caldwell. Not for any particular reason, there was nothing there now, except the construction that had been going on for most of the year, the new building going up in place of the old one, which Rachel had declined to look at when it was coming down, and which she had been slowly coming to terms with in the months since. They stood on the sidewalk on a cold December evening and looked at the new structure, half-built steel and concrete, with the particular blankness of a building that hadn't yet decided what it was going to be. Does it bother you? Michael asked. Rachel looked at where booth 7 had been. She knew the approximate location by triangulation, the corner of the building, the window that had looked onto the parking lot, the particular angle of the December light. Not the way I thought it would, she said. He was quiet, waiting. I thought it would feel like losing the place. Like Daniel losing the place. She looked at the new steel. But it doesn't. It just feels like a building. She looked at him. The booth is on Whitfield Street. The coffee is on Whitfield Street. Everything that mattered is on Whitfield Street. Noah said something like that, Michael said. Buildings aren't the diner. He said that to you too. He says a lot of things. Something in his voice, warmth, affection. The particular thing that happened to his voice when he talked about Noah that Rachel had gotten used to hearing. He told me last week that I look at you the way people look at things they're afraid of losing. Rachel looked at him. I told him he was right, Michael said. She took his hand on the cold December sidewalk on the corner of Main and Caldwell, where a diner had stood for 30 years, and where a young man with an easy grin had eaten breakfast on Friday mornings and tried to find the way back to his brother. You're not going to lose me, she said. I know, he said. I'm still afraid of it, but I know. That's honest. I've been practicing. They stood for a moment longer on the corner looking at the construction. The December sky was clear and cold and full of stars. A car passed on Main Street. The Whitfield Street building was 14 blocks away, its lights on the diner's last Thursday customers finishing up. Ready, Michael said. Yes, Rachel said. They walked. 3 years after Michael Harrington first walked through the door of Patsy's Diner on the corner of Main and Caldwell on a first Friday in March, with the dogwoods just beginning to consider blooming, he walked through the door of Patsy's Diner on Whitfield Street. He hung his coat on the hook by the door, a new hook, a Whitfield Street touch that hadn't existed on Main and Caldwell. He walked through the diner, Donna at the counter, Carla in the kitchen, the oscillating fans, the coffee, and he stopped at booth 7. Rachel was already there. She was sitting with her coffee, her order pad in her apron pocket, her elbows on the maple table looking at the back alley window with the particular expression she had when she was thinking about something that was working itself out slowly, and she was letting it. She heard him. She turned. He sat down across from her. She looked at him. This man she had come to know. The way you come to know something over a long time through accumulated evidence and repeated experience, and the gradual closing of distances that you hadn't realized you were closing until they were gone. She thought about the first Friday, the man who had sat alone and looked at a parking lot and ordered the same thing he always ordered, and tipped 20 on 14 and said almost nothing. She thought about the book and the photograph and the cold water and the careful distances and the creek and the letters and the Lexington hotel room and a boy named Daniel who had chosen a booth for its warmth. She thought about, I just want to know things, even when they're bad. She thought about the difference between being alone and being lonely. She thought about all the ways people crossed distances and all the ways they failed to and all the ways sometimes they got there. Coffee, she said. Please, he said. She got up and poured it and brought it back and sat down again. And the March morning came through the Whitfield Street window, and the coffee was strong and the booth was the same booth. And Michael Harrington wrapped his hands around the cup and looked not at the window, but at her, and she looked back at him. And neither of them said anything for a moment because nothing needed to be said. He was not there because of grief. He was there because of her. She had known that for a while. She was glad to be sitting in the proof of it. The booth held them the way it always had, the particular warmth and enclosure of a well-made thing, the maple, and the morning, and the coffee, and the company. Outside, a car went by on Whitfield Street. The dogwoods on Main Street, half a block away, were making their decision. Rachel thought about Daniel. She thought about him sometimes. This man she'd never met who had chosen this place and left something in it that turned out to be more than anyone had known. She thought about what he'd written in his journal. The booth is his. It always was. He just hasn't sat in it yet. She thought, and now he has. And he brought someone with him. She thought Daniel would have liked that. She thought Daniel would have liked a great many things if he'd had the time. She thought about all the people who were still there, Noah working on his essay, Shelley working on her year, Patsy behind the counter, Michael across the table. And she thought that what they were doing, all of them, the imperfect and the ongoing and the daily work of it, was the right kind of thing to be doing, and that it was enough, that it was more than enough, that it was in fact everything. The first Friday in March, the coffee strong, the booth warm, the light coming through the window the way it always did, golden and specific and true, illuminating the ordinary things and making them in the way that light does when it hits the right surfaces briefly, quietly extraordinary. Rachel Morgan looked at Michael Harrington across the table in booth 7, and she thought, here we are. And they were. The end. Author's note on the story. The title of this story promised a secret, and the secret was never really about a diner. It was about a man who had been building a case against himself for 25 years, and a woman who had been managing things alone for longer than that, and the slow, unspectacular work of two people learning that they did not have to do the next part of their lives in the same way they'd done the previous parts. It was about a brother named Daniel who loved in the way that some people love, quietly, persistently, across distances that were too wide to cross, but that he went on loving across anyway, because love does not require the other person's presence to remain true. It was about a booth in a diner, about the way places hold the people who've been in them, about the particular warmth of a place where someone once felt at home and how that warmth stays in the walls long after the person is gone. And it was about a boy who read a book about a dog and understood that it wasn't about the dog. That's the kind of reader worth writing for. That's the kind of person worth being. But before the author's note, a few more months, because the story doesn't end cleanly. Stories don't. In October, Shelley came for a weekend with 14 months of sobriety and the news that she'd been offered a permanent position at the treatment center, and she and Noah spent an afternoon walking the creek together again. And this time when they came back, they were talking about a book he was reading for school, actually discussing it the way two people do when they've stopped performing their relationship and started having it. Shelley said before she left, I want to try to be there more, not full custody. I know that's not the right thing yet, but phone calls, more visits, actually showing up. Noah looked at her. Okay, he said. But call when you say you're going to. I will, Shelley said. Even when things are hard, he said. Especially then. Shelley looked at Rachel over Noah's shoulder. Rachel kept her face even and her hands still and thought 14 years old, and he already knows the most important thing. She thought he always knew it. He just didn't have the room to say it. Yes, Shelley said. Especially then.
Bye.
In November, Michael took Noah to a University of Tennessee football game in Knoxville. Rachel had not been invited, which she discovered after the fact when she asked Noah where he'd been, and he told her in the specific, slightly abashed way of someone who'd done something enjoyable and wasn't sure if he was supposed to have done it. He asked if I wanted to go, Noah said. He said you probably wouldn't want to sit in a football stadium for 4 hours. He was right, Rachel said. He told me to tell you that too. Noah looked at his shoes. He bought me the worst hot dog I've ever had in my life, and it was great. Rachel thought about Michael Harrington, 59 years old, sitting in a football stadium with her grandson eating a bad hot dog. She thought about the logistics CEO and the company and the serious gray eyes and the way he looked at things carefully before reacting, and she thought about how much room was apparently inside a person that you couldn't see from the outside and how slowly you came to know it. I'm glad you went, she said. He said, Noah paused. He said that his brother would have liked me. He said Daniel would have wanted to know me. He looked up. I didn't know what to say. What did you say? I said I wish I could have met him too. He shrugged. It seemed true. Rachel said nothing. She sat with that for a moment, the booth that connected people across time and distance, the way love persisted past its apparent occasion. And then she said, It was true. Yeah, Noah said. I thought so. In December, Rachel filled out a form. It was a college interest form, not an application, not yet for a community studies program, at the branch campus in Harwick. She'd been thinking about it since the spring, when the diner transition had made her think about what else she knew how to do, what skills she had that she hadn't been using in the specific narrow form of waitressing. She'd been doing the quiet accounting of herself that she'd avoided for most of her adult life, and the accounting said she knew how to manage complex situations. She knew how to read people. She knew how to keep a place running when the place wanted to stop running. She knew how to help without being the center of the help. She filled out the form and put it in the Harwick campus's return envelope and put a stamp on it and put it in the mailbox on Whitfield Street, and she didn't tell anyone for a week. She told Michael first. A social work program, he said. Community development, actually, but adjacent. She looked at her coffee. They were at the Italian place in Harwick, the usual table. I've been thinking about what I want the next part to look like, and I think it looks like having something I built, not just... She stopped. Not just managing other people's things. He was looking at her. It's 2 nights a week, she said. It'll take 4 years at this pace. Okay, he said. I'm 51. I know, he said. I'll be 55 when I finish. Yes, he said. And she looked at him, the gray eyes, the expression of someone who had learned was still learning to look at things clearly. And nothing, she said. That was the thing I needed to say out loud so I could hear how it actually sounds. How does it sound? She smiled. Like a plan, she said. He smiled back the real one. Good, he said. She picked up her wine. She thought 55 and I'll have built something. 55 and I'll know something I didn't used to know. 55 with Noah in college maybe, and Shelley working toward the version of herself she's been trying to get to, and Michael at the table and the booth on Whitfield Street, and all of it complicated and ongoing and real. She thought that's the whole thing. That's exactly what I want. Outside, the Harwick night was cold and clear and full of itself, and inside the restaurant, the candle made its small claim against the dark. And Rachel Morgan sat across from Michael Harrington and felt the particular fullness of a life that was not finished and was not perfect, and was absolutely, specifically, exactly hers. She picked up her glass. To Daniel, she said. Michael picked up his glass. He looked at her. He said, to all of them. They drank. The night held them. Everything continued.